Chapter 2588. He did not expect that the people of the Yun Palace had been hiding around him all this time. The Array Grandmaster was furious and regretful, but what was done was done. It was useless to say anything. However, in his opinion, even if Li Tian killed him, what could he do? It was impossible for him to break the formation. He did not expect that the people of the Yun Palace had been hiding around him all this time. The Array Grandmaster was furious and regretful, but what was done was done. It was useless to say anything. However, in his opinion, even if Li Tian killed him, what could he do? It was impossible for him to break the formation. In other words, as long as Li Tian tampered with the formation, Mo Lin would notice it immediately. Then, Mo Lin would kill Li Tian to avenge him. The three formations were more like sensing formations than trapping formations. As long as there was the slightest change, Mo Lin would be able to sense it immediately. After all, Mo Lin was not stupid enough to stop Lin Yun with the three formations that had been set up temporarily. The three formations were more like an early warning. However, after hearing the Array Grandmaster's words, Li Tian did not care at all. He smiled and said, "How could I not think of such a simple problem? Therefore, when I was carving the formation, I secretly tampered with it. Now, as long as I am in a specific position of the formation, even if I tear a hole, Mo Lin will not notice it. Just like this." As he spoke, Li Tian pointed his finger at the array. Immediately, the Array Master tore a hole in the array. Seeing this, the Array Master was stunned. In terms of attainments in the Tao of formations, Li Tian was not inferior to this formation Grandmaster in the slightest. In fact, he was much stronger than this formation Grandmaster. Therefore, the formation Grandmaster did not notice some of the tricks he had played. Everything was premeditated. When the Array Grandmaster saw the hole in the formation, he knew that Mo Lin could not trap Lin Yun and the rest. Lin Yun and the rest could leave easily. Seeing the Array Grandmaster's changing expression, Li Tian smiled faintly and said, "Okay, rest in peace." With that, the Array Grandmaster's eyes dimmed and he died on the spot. After killing the Array Grandmaster, Li Tian quickly tore a hole in the three formations. He was just waiting for Lin Yun and the rest to arrive. As for the location, he had already told Lin Yun before, so there would be no problem. About an hour later, Lin Yun and the rest appeared outside the formation. They successfully escaped from the three formations through the hole that Li Tian had torn and did not attract any attention. Mo Lin knew nothing about it. After Lin Yun and the rest successfully passed through the three formations, Li Tian waved his hand and the hole in the formation was instantly restored. It was impossible to tell that someone had passed through the formation. Li Tian had already disguised himself as the Array Grandmaster of the Great Devil World and hid there. Mo Lin would never have thought that the three formations were useless in the eyes of Lin Yun and the rest when he gave the order to draw the formation. After successfully receiving Lin Yun and the rest out of the Heavenly Devil continent, Lin Yun looked at the crowd and smiled. "Let's go. We're really tired after fighting for so many days. Let's find a place to have a good rest." With that, the crowd left slowly. They were not worried about being chased. At this time, Mo Lin was probably still searching for Lin Yun and the rest in the Heavenly Devil continent. He did not expect that Lin Yun and the rest had already left the Heavenly Devil continent. After a whole day, Mo Lin led many experts from the Great Devil World to search for Lin Yun and the rest in the Heavenly Devil continent. However, a day had passed and there was still no result. At this time, Mo Lin began to suspect that Lin Yun and the rest had already left the Heavenly Devil continent. Therefore, he sent people to check the formation. However, the result was that the formation was intact and there was no sign of it being damaged. Thousands of troops and horses. After receiving this result, Mo Lin said with doubt in his eyes, "If the formation is not damaged, why can't we find them? Pass down the order. We have to find them even if we have to dig 3 feet into the ground." Lin Yun and the rest were almost exhausted. As long as Lin Yun and the rest were completely trapped, Mo Lin was confident that he could kill them directly. He did not realize that Lin Yun and the rest had already left the great devil world. Or rather, Mo Lin was very confident in the three formations. If Lin Yun and the rest had really left, he would definitely have noticed it. However, until now, Mo Lin did not feel the slightest fluctuation from the formation. After confirming that Lin Yun and the rest were definitely still in the heavenly devil continent, they searched for another 3 days. During these 3 days, the entire heavenly devil continent could be said to have been turned over. Every inch of the continent was searched, but there was still no trace of Lin Yun and the rest. As for where Lin Yun and the rest were at this time, they had already left the heavenly devil continent and arrived on a small continent in the great devil world. At this time, they were comfortably drinking wine in a small city. After 3 days, everyone's injuries were almost healed. At this time, they were drinking and teasing Mo Lin. "Palace Master, do you think Mo Lin is still looking for us in the heavenly devil continent?" the monk said with a treacherous smile after taking a big gulp of wine. Upon hearing this, Lin Yun said with amusement, "I think so. After all, no matter how stupid a person is, there will be a day when he comes to his senses." After they left, Mo Lin searched the heavenly devil continent with great fanfare for 4 days. However, he did not find any trace of them. He must have suspected something. Perhaps Mo Lin already felt that something was amiss. Lin Yun was right. At this time, in the heavenly devil continent, Mo Lin's face was gloomy. He looked at the 2 formation masters kneeling in front of him. The murderous intent in his eyes was about to materialize. It was as if he wanted to cut them into pieces. "Didn't you say that there would be no problem with the 3 formations? Didn't you say that as long as Lin Yun attacked the formations, I would be able to sense it immediately? Then why didn't I sense anything and the formations are intact, but Lin Yun and the rest escaped from the heavenly devil continent?" Just as Lin Yun thought, after searching for 4 days, Mo Lin did feel that something was amiss. Therefore, he began to check the formations. Although the 3 formations were intact, Mo Lin still found a problem. One of the formation masters had disappeared. His disciple, Li Wen, had also disappeared. The mysterious disappearance of the 2 made Mo Lin instantly certain that Lin Yun and the rest must have escaped from the heavenly devil continent. It was ridiculous that they had spared no effort to search for them for 4 days. Needless to say, Lin Yun was probably laughing at him at this time. He felt like an idiot who had been fooled by Lin Yun. Therefore, when he looked at the 2 formation masters in front of him, Mo Lin wanted to tear them apart. They had boasted in the beginning, but in the end they still could not stop Li Yun. They were simply useless. Chapter 2589. None of the 3 spirit arrays worked. Lin Yun and the others escaped from the heavenly demon continent easily under his nose. They wanted to kill Lin Yun's group at all costs, and in this battle, the heavenly demon continent had also lost many cultivators, especially Emperor Realm and End Realm cultivators. The number of casualties could only be described as disastrous. Even so, even after paying a huge price, he still couldn't catch Lin Yun and the others. This made Mo Lin furious. Looking at the 2 array masters in front of him, Mo Lin really wanted to kill them. However, after hesitating for a while, he chose to give up. After all, an array master was still very useful to the great demon world. Now that an array grand master had already died, if these 2 people were also killed, then there would be no more array grandmasters in the great devil world. Mo Lin knew that it was unrealistic to rely on the spirit arrays to stop Lin Yun. After all, with Lin Yun's cultivation and combat power, the spirit arrays could only trap her for a moment at most. It wouldn't have any substantial effect at all. He failed again. This time, he used almost the entire power of the great demon world. Even so, Lin Yun still escaped in the end. Moreover, Shao Chun had broken through to the ancestor realm. As a result, the matter of the Great Thousand World was even more difficult to deal with. The thought of giving up on the Great Thousand World secretly arose in his heart. After all, in the current situation, the benefits outweighed the disadvantages. Because of the orders of the guys in the Origin World, Mo Lin had been attacking the Great Thousand World. However, he was always stopped by Lin Yun and Mu Lingxian. For the sake of the Great Thousand World, the Demon Abyss had paid a huge price. Mo Lin had to seriously consider whether such a price was worth it to take down the Great Thousand World. Because even if they took down the Great Thousand World, what benefits would the Great Demon World get? The most important thing was the origin energy. Mo Lin couldn't get it at all. Only the cultivators of the Great Thousand World could get the origin energy of the Great Thousand World. This was something that everyone knew. For the sake of the Great Thousand World, they had paid such a heavy price. It was really not worth it. At the same time, Mo Lin had already guessed Lin Yun's purpose. She wanted to force him to withdraw he and the others from the primordial world. Mo Lin fell into deep thought alone. He knew that now was not the time to fight to the death with Lin Yun and the others. It was completely unnecessary. However, if he wanted to solve the problem at hand, he could only give up on the operation in the Great Thousand World. He could not make up his mind. At the same time, just as Mo Lin was in a dilemma, Lin Yun and the rest, who had been resting for a few days, started to move again. Xiao Chen had successfully broken through to the Ancestor Realm, but Lin Yun still had no intention of retreating. This was because Mo Lin had not ordered Mo and the others to retreat. Hence, Lin Yun wanted to add fuel to the fire and force Mo Lin to withdraw Mo and the other experts from the Devil Abyss. Attack the Spirit Vein? In a small city, the City Lord's mansion had long been controlled by Lin Yun and the others. At this moment, in the main hall, everyone was gathered together to discuss what to do next. Upon hearing that Lin Yun wanted to attack the Spirit Vein, Lin Hu asked doubtfully. In response, Lin Yun smiled and said, "Yes, we are going to attack the Spirit Vein. However, this time we are not going to snatch it. We are going to destroy it directly. As a powerful universe, the Great Devil World has many spirit veins. However, no matter how many spirit veins there are, they will not be able to withstand our destruction. Moreover, it is very difficult to defend the spirit vein. Mo Lin can't do it perfectly. This is our chance." They did not intend to attack the local sects in the Great Devil World. After the previous incident, the major sects in the Great Devil World must have been prepared. At this time, it was obviously not the best choice to attack these sections. It was even very likely that they would be surrounded by Mo Lin again. The spiritual meridian was different. The spiritual meridian was scattered. Almost every continent had a spiritual meridian. Even Mo Lin could not guard every spiritual meridian. Moreover, Lin Yun did not seem to be a treasure. However, it was definitely the life gate of any universe. Think about it. If a universe did not have a spirit vein, what would the result be? It was estimated that the martial arts of the entire universe would be destroyed. Therefore, Mo Lin would definitely not watch the spirit vein be destroyed one by one. The spirit vein was the life gate of the Great Devil World. It was something that Mo Lin could not give up. It was something that all warriors had to use for cultivation. Therefore, Lin Yun directly targeted the spirit vein. Naturally, no one had any objections to Lin Yun's idea. Attacking the spirit vein was indeed the best choice. Moreover, they could also force Mo Lin to make a choice in the shortest time possible. After making a decision, everyone immediately started to act. This way, there was a spirit vein on the continent. Although the scale was not big, it was very low. With the strength of Lin Yun and the others, they could easily destroy it. As for the guards of the spirit vein, they were useless in their eyes. They directly left the city and walked in the direction of the spirit vein. Not long after, the group of people arrived outside the spirit vein. They did not hide their figures and swaggered in. When the warrior in charge of the guards saw Lin Yun and the others, he immediately stopped them. "Stop. Who are you?" The guards were not from the demon abyss. They were disciples of a big force on the continent. In the eyes of Lin Yun and the others, the cultivation of these disciples was extremely low. Without replying, Lin Hu waved his hand and immediately slapped the disciples away. They did not even have the strength to fight back, let alone stop Lin Yun and the others. Just like that, they openly broke into the spirit vein. As the only spirit vein on the continent, there were naturally experts guarding it. Therefore, when Lin Yun and the others walked into the spirit vein, an expert with cultivation in the comprehension state appeared in front of everyone. However, when he saw Lin Yun and the others, his face instantly darkened. As an expert in the comprehension state, he naturally knew a lot of things that ordinary people did not know. He also heard that Lin Yun had led people to break into the great devil world and wreak havoc everywhere. He had seen the portraits of Lin Yun and the others before. Now that he saw the real person, the expert in the comprehension state naturally recognized them immediately. His face was solemn and he was stunned. In response, Lin Yun only smiled slightly. "It seems that you know who we are. In that case, please go back and pass a message that we want this spirit vein." She did not intend to kill anyone. After all, killing a comprehension state warrior would not affect the great devil world much. Mo Lin would not care about it. Therefore, the purpose of Lin Yun and the others was to destroy the spirit vein. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 2590. A comprehension stage cultivator was indeed not worthy of their attention. After speaking, the crowd directly walked forward, completely ignoring the comprehension stage cultivator. With regards to this, the comprehension stage cultivator clearly did not dare to obstruct them in the slightest. A comprehension stage cultivator was indeed not worthy of their attention. After speaking, the crowd directly walked forward, completely ignoring the comprehension stage cultivator. With regards to this, the comprehension stage cultivator clearly did not dare to obstruct them in the slightest. After Lin Yun and the rest left, the comprehension state warrior hurriedly took out a voice transmission talisman and contacted his sect, reporting the appearance of Lin Yun and the rest. However, this was not a threat to Lin Yun and the rest. Lin Hu easily destroyed the spiritual vein. They had never thought of taking the spirit stones from the spirit vein. Although these spirit stones were a necessity for all cultivators, it was definitely not suitable for Lin Yun and the others to bring these spirit stones with them under the current circumstances. Directly destroying them would be the best choice. The spiritual vein was destroyed by Lin Yun and the rest. At the same time, Mo Lin, who was still in the heavenly demon continent, immediately learned about the whereabouts of Lin Yun and the rest. Now in the great demon world, as long as someone saw Lin Yun and the rest, Mo Lin would know immediately. They had indeed escaped from the heavenly demon continent. Although Mo Lin was angry, he could do nothing about it. He could only rush to the continent where Lin Yun and the rest were. However, given the distance between the two places, even though Mo Lin was faster, Lin Yun and the rest had already disappeared without a trace when he arrived. Lin Yun and the rest had escaped. Moreover, the spiritual vein was completely destroyed. Looking at the messy spiritual vein, the frost python in Mo Lin's eyes became more vigorous. Logically speaking, a spiritual vein did not have much impact on the great demon world. It could even be said that it was not a big deal. What really made Mo Lin angry was that he could not do anything to Lin Yun. It was as if he had always been led by Lin Yun by the nose. No matter what happened, he was always one step behind. Every time he arrived with his men, Lin Yun would have already withdrawn with her men. Mo Lin was in the great devil world, but he could not do anything to Lin Yun. That was what made Mo Lin most angry. Mo Lin clenched his fists and felt like he was being played. He wanted to tear Lin Yun apart. If Lin Yun was still there, Mo Lin would not hesitate to kill Lin Yun even if he had to die together with her. It was a pity that Lin Yun was not around. No matter how angry Mo Lin was, there was nothing he could do. Lin Yun and the rest, who had no idea that Mo Lin was infuriated, had already left the mainland and were heading to their next destination in the spatial spirit boat. Next, Lin Yun would continue to attack the spiritual veins in the great devil world, so that Mo Lin would have no time to take care of them. In the end, he would have to withdraw Mo and the rest from the primordial world. As long as Mo Lin withdrew Mo and the rest, the evil sect would naturally be alone. Based on Lin Yun's understanding of the evil sect, he would definitely not continue to persist. With this idea in mind, Lin Yun ordered everyone to split into two groups. Xiao Qin, the monk, the Taoist priest, Ning Shuang, and Li Tian were in one group. Lin Yun, Lin Hu, and Mu Bei were in another group. Splitting into two groups was to better entangle the experts of the great devil world, so that they would not know how to defend. After making the arrangements, Lin Yun specially reminded Xiao Qin, now that you have broken through to the ancestor realm, you will not improve much even if you continue to fight. You should pay more attention to your safety. There is no need to fight to the death with the warriors of the great devil world. You can't be surrounded. Otherwise, it will be very dangerous. In a word, if you advance, I will retreat. If the enemy retreats, I will advance. There was no need to fight the warriors of the great devil world head-on. It was meaningless. As long as they forced Mo Lin to withdraw Mo and the rest, Lin Yun and the rest would have completed their mission. Xiao Qin also nodded in response. After breaking through to the ancestor realm, Xiao Qin also felt that it was not suitable for him to continue to break through in his current situation. Cultivation paid attention to balance between tension and relaxation. In order to break through to the ancestor realm, Xiao Qin could be said to have used the most extreme method. He had used the crisis of life and death to squeeze out his potential. In this way, he had successfully broken through to the ancestor realm. However, although this method had a miraculous effect, it was obviously impossible to use it frequently. It was not beneficial to constantly squeeze out one's potential. It might even be counterproductive. Therefore, after breaking through to the ancestor realm, it was time for Xiao Qin to relax a little, especially in terms of cultivation. He should temporarily postpone the pace of continuing to break through. Xiao Qin understood this and also understood Lin Yun's intentions. She was afraid that she would be surrounded by the powerhouses of the great devil world because of a moment of impulse. Then, the gains would not make up for the losses. Moreover, to be honest, although the actions of Xiao Qin and the others this time made Mo Lin furious and had a headache, in fact, everyone was walking on a tightrope throughout the entire process. If they were not careful, they might pay a heavy price. To put it simply, if Li Tian had made a slight mistake in the Heavenly Devil Continent, everyone would not have been able to leave the Heavenly Devil Continent. Then, everyone would probably end up badly. Mo Lin was angry, but this was his base camp after all. It was the great devil world. Therefore, he could make mistakes and make mistakes. At worst, he would let Lin Yun and the others escape. However, Lin Yun, Xiao Qin, and the others could not do so. Because this was the great devil world, everyone could not be the slightest bit careless and could not make any mistakes, not even once. Because of one mistake, it was very likely that everyone would pay with their lives. Thinking about it, if they were completely surrounded by Mo Lin, how much hope would they have of escaping? Even if someone could escape, there would definitely be someone who would stay in the great devil world forever. Thus, he had to be extremely cautious on this trip, especially after splitting up. In any case, Lin Yun only had one goal, and that was to destroy the spirit vein. There was no need to get entangled with the great demonic world's cultivators, and he couldn't get caught up in a fight. Moreover, Lin Yuan and the others, who were in the Hong Meng world at this time, would also cooperate with her. Lin Yun had already contacted Mu Lingxian and asked him to continue to put pressure on Mo He and the others in the Hongmeng world. With a two-pronged approach, they would force Mo He and the others to retreat. Pressure was to constantly create pressure on Mo Lin so that he would have no choice but to compromise and give up on the Great Thousand World in the face of this huge pressure. After personally instructing them, everyone split up. Xiao Chen, monk, Taoist priest, Ning Shuang, and Li Tian went in a different direction from Lin Yun and the others. At the same time, during this period in the Hongmeng world, Lin Yuan and the others took the initiative to attack almost every day, which annoyed Mo He and the others. There was almost no time to rest. After the battle ended, Lin Yuan and the others came again before they could even catch their breath. Moreover, they didn't even give them a chance to speak before attacking. Chapter 2591. The continuous entanglement of Lin Yuan and the others gave Mo He a headache. Coupled with the matter of the Great Devil World, Mo He and the others were even more upset. The continuous entanglement of Lin Yuan and the others gave Mo He and the others a headache. Coupled with the matter of the Great Devil World, Mo He and the others were even more upset. Mo He and the others were naturally aware of what had happened in the Great Devil World. They also knew that Mo Lin had been enraged several times because of this matter. However, he had not managed to get rid of Lin Yun and the others. Not to mention killing them, they could not even expel them. Many warriors in the Great Devil World had been injured or killed because of this. The pressure in front of them was increasing, and the Great Devil World behind them was in chaos. This made Mo He and the others want to retreat. It was not that they were afraid of Lin Yuan and the others, but there was no benefit to being in a stalemate here. In addition, it was impossible for Lin Yun and the others to retreat voluntarily. After all, this was the Hongmeng world. How could Lin Yuan and the others retreat? Wouldn't that be tantamount to letting Mo He and the others enter directly? Therefore, Lin Yuan and the others would definitely fight to the death. Moreover, Mu Lingxian was still in charge of the Hongmeng world. Although Mu Lingxian had not made a move so far, his name alone was enough to intimidate Mo He and the others. Mu Lingxian had not chosen to make a move so far. Firstly, he felt that he would lose face if he made a move. After all, Mo Lin and the others had not made a move personally. Secondly, he did not want to escalate the situation. All of Lin Yun's actions in the Great Demonic World were to relieve the pressure in the Primordial World. Once Mu Lingxian personally took action, even if Mo Lin couldn't free himself, the person from the evil sect wouldn't just stand by and watch. It was obviously impossible for a world master to make a move on his subordinates without restraint. Once things developed to this point, Lin Yun's efforts in the Great Devil World would all be in vain. At that time, even if Mo Lin wanted to withdraw Mo He and the others, he would have to consider the reputation of the evil sect. Therefore, Mu Lingxian had endured until now and had not made a move. But even so, Mo and the others couldn't just ignore Mu Lingxian. After all, who could guarantee that a wild beast wouldn't bite? Due to various reasons, Mu Lingxian had yet to personally take part in the battle. However, if Mu Lingxian suddenly took action one day, it would definitely be a fatal blow to Mo He and the others. It would be enough to make them pay a heavy price. Therefore, even though Mu Lingxian was completely watching from the sidelines, Mo He and the others had to divert some of their attention to guard against Mu Lingxian's sudden attack. The pressure on Lin Yuan and the others was getting heavier and heavier. They didn't give Mo and the others a chance to catch their breath. The situation on the Grand Mist World side was slowly reversing. Lin Yuan and the others were gradually taking the initiative. On the Great Devil World's side, Lin Yun, Xiao Qin, and the others were progressing smoothly. Just as Lin Yun had thought at the beginning, there were many spiritual veins in the Great Devil World, and Mo Lin could not take care of everything. Therefore, they did not encounter any resistance. After all, with their cultivation, Emperor Realm and Half-Step Ancestor Realm cultivators could not stop them at all. Moreover, How many ancestor realm masters were there in the great devil world? Moreover, he and the others, who were still in the Grand Mist world, were even fewer. It was obviously unrealistic to rely on such a small number of people to guard against all the spiritual veins in the great devil world. Therefore, Lin could not do anything about the actions of Lin Yun and the others. After successfully destroying a spiritual vein, Xiao Chun and the others did not stay for long. They chose to leave immediately. Without Lin Yun, Li Tian became the temporary leader of Xiao Chen's team. Xiao Chun did not have any objection to this. After all, Xiao Chun had witnessed Li Tian's strength with his own eyes. Li Tian's wisdom could be said to be flawless. After a few days, Xiao Chun admired Li Tian's ability even more. Basically, the movements of the great devil world had been calculated by Li Tian. Which spirit vein had powerhouses guarding it, and which spirit vein had insufficient guards, Li Tian could see it all very clearly. Because of this, under Li Tian's command, Xiao Chun and the others seemed to be very relaxed after destroying several spiritual veins in a row. There was no pressure at all. It was no wonder that Li Tian was the chief strategist of the Cloud Palace. Xiao Chun had also come to realize that a sect needed someone like Li Tian in charge. After all, although strength was the most important indicator to measure a sect, and in many cases, strength was the most critical factor that determined everything. However, if a sect was made up of reckless people who were hesitant and lacked wisdom, the result would naturally not be good. This was certain. After all, many things could not be solved blindly by relying on strength alone. In other words, with a person like Li Tian in charge, Cloud Palace could often obtain the greatest benefits with the least damage. In the long run, this was obviously very important for the development of Cloud Palace. Riding on the spatial spirit boat, they continued to rush to the next destination. On the way, Li Tian seemed to have seen through Xiao Chen's thoughts. While making tea, he smiled and said, "Thinking about your sword sect?" With Li Tian's intelligence, it was not difficult for him to guess what he was thinking. Therefore, Xiao Chun admitted frankly, "Indeed, I was thinking that it would be great if my sword sect could have someone like Senior. Many things could be easily solved." Xiao Chun was not lying at all. Xiao Chun really admired Li Tian and was eager to have someone like Li Tian in the sword sect. Hearing this, Li Tian smiled and personally brewed a cup of tea for Xiao Chun. Then, he said casually, "Everyone has their own value, has their own irreplaceable advantages, and has a unique position. Among the 9 palace masters of the 9 palaces above the clouds, my talent is the weakest. In fact, I am no different from an ordinary person. Don't look down on my progenitor realm cultivation. You should know that the palace master spent a lot of effort to help me break through to the progenitor realm." Li Tian's words sounded a little self-deprecating, especially when it came to his own cultivation. He was not much stronger than an ordinary person, but he still became one of the palace masters of the 9 palaces above the clouds. Moreover, he was an irreplaceable think tank of Cloud Palace. After saying this, Li Tian took a sip of tea and changed the topic. "You want to find someone like me, but you don't know that someone like me has always been by your side. It's just that you have never noticed." Xiao Chun froze on the spot as soon as he heard those words. He wondered if there was such a person around him. There was someone who could compare to Li Tian? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2592. Xiao Chun did not know who Li Tian was referring to, but Li Tian just smiled, and did not say anything in the face of Xiao Chen's questioning. In this regard, Xiao Chun was very unwilling, but there was nothing he could do. After all, he could not force Li Tian, could he? Xiao Chun did not know who Li Tian was referring to, but Li Tian just smiled, and did not say anything in the face of Xiao Chen's questioning. In this regard, Xiao Chun was very unwilling, but there was nothing he could do. After all, he could not force Li Tian, could he? After chatting with Li Tian for a while, the group arrived at their next destination, which was also the next spirit vein that Xiao Chen and the others were about to destroy. The result was obvious. Although this spirit vein had been prepared for a long time, there was no demon abyss master guarding it. With only a few Emperor Realm masters, Xiao Chen and the others were unable to stop Xiao Chen and the others. Therefore, it was easy for Xiao Chen and the others to completely destroy this spirit vein. This was already the 18th spirit vein that Xiao Chen and the others had destroyed. This was not counting the harvest that Lin Yun and the others had obtained. In the face of Xiao Chen, Lin Yun and the others' wanton destruction in the great demon world, Mo Lin tried his best to stop them. However, there were so many spirit veins in the great demon world. Mo Lin did not know where Lin Yun and the others' next target would be, so it was impossible for him to make arrangements in advance. Manpower was limited, and ordinary cultivators could not stop Lin Yun, Xiao Chen and the others at all. They could only watch as spirit veins were destroyed one after another. 10 days passed in a row. In these 10 days, Mo Lin heard the most news about another spirit vein being destroyed and Lin Yun and the others escaping unscathed. Mo Lin was angry at the beginning, but now, he was helpless in the face of such news. Especially after Xiao Chen broke through, Lin Yun changed her strategy and did not give the demon abyss experts a chance to fight. Previously, Lin Yun was not afraid of a battle. However, she did not give them the chance to do so now. Every time Mo Lin and his men arrived, Lin Yun and the others had already disappeared. This made Mo Lin feel as though he had punched cotton with all his might. It was very annoying. At the same time, it also made the major forces of the great demonic world feel as if every bush and tree was an enemy. Who knew where Lin Yun and the others would appear in the next moment? Perhaps they would suffer in the next second. In 10 days, the entire great devil world was almost turned upside down by Lin Yun and the others. One by one, the spirit veins were destroyed. Xiao Chen and the others had been on the road for the past 10 days. Sitting in the spatial spirit boat, Tyrant didn't care about his image at all. He was gnawing on a drumstick and drinking wine. Haha, I don't know how Mo Lin feels now. I guess he's mad. Hearing Tyrant's words, Li Tian, who was beside him, said faintly, "He's not mad. After the initial anger, Mo Lin has probably calmed down now. Next, it depends on his choice. After all, Mo Lin was the world lord of a universe. If he lost his mind, it would be too unreasonable. At the same time, it would be underestimating him." According to Li Tian, Mo Lin was indeed very angry at the beginning because Lin Yun's provocation made him feel ashamed. However, after the attack and the encirclement, Mo Lin should have gradually calmed down. Next, it depended on Mo Lin's choice. In fact, there was one thing that Lin Yun did not mention. That was, this operation was a gamble from the beginning. The biggest variable in this gamble was Mo Lin. On the surface, Mo Lin seemed to have been passive and did not have the right to choose at all. However, that was not the case. In fact, the right to choose had always been in Mo Lin's hands. 20 to 50,000 at this time, Mo Lin was faced with such a choice. His choice was directly related to the direction of the future. Li Tian and Lin Yun could set up such a trap, but there was no way to control the final direction of the situation. After all, no matter how smart Li Tian was, it was impossible for him to control Mo Lin's choice. Now, there were two choices in front of Mo Lin. One was to choose to compromise and withdraw he and the others from the Hongmeng world. Then, Lin Yun and the others would leave the great devil world, and both sides would have a temporary truce. As for the second choice, it was to fight to the death and bring people to attack the macro world directly. However, in this way, the great devil world would definitely be destroyed. Of course, the macro world would not end well either. Mo Lin must be very clear now that it was almost impossible to catch Lin Yun. This was because Lin Yun was too agile. With the speed of the warriors in the great devil world, it was impossible to catch up with her. Therefore, they could only attack instead of defend. Both sides directly exchanged their base camp. Mo Lin did not want the Great Devil World, and Lin Yun did not want the Macro World either. This was Mo Lin's choice. Now, it was time for him to make a choice. Of course, from Lin Yun and Li Tian's point of view, they did not want Mo Lin to choose the second choice. This was because it was almost equivalent to a life and death struggle. Even though Lin Yun could destroy the Great Devil World, Mo Lin could also destroy the Macro World. Li Tian was a little worried about Mo Lin's choice. He did not know if Mo Lin would choose a life and death struggle. While Li Tian was a little worried, Mo Lin, who had returned to the demon abyss, was also making the same choice. At this time, Mo Lin was sitting alone on the stone bench in his residence. There was no anger on his face. As Li Tian said, after the initial anger, Mo Lin gradually calmed down. With a calm expression, Mo Lin looked at an expert from the demon abyss in front of him and asked faintly, "Do you think it's worthwhile for us to fight to the death with Lin Yun?" Hearing Mo Lin's words, the expert from the demon abyss immediately understood what Mo Lin was thinking. He frowned and kept silent for a while before saying, "Sect Master, now is not the time to start a war." Yes, now is not the time to start a war. Lin Yun is probably aware of this. To put it bluntly, Lin Yun's action this time was more to disgust herself. In fact, it did not have much impact on the Great Devil World as a whole. The Great Devil World was rich and imposing. It did not matter if they lost a few hundred spiritual veins. Lin Yun obviously knew this, so she was not afraid. She did not completely challenge Mo Lin's bottom line and forced Mo Lin to make a choice. After all, Mo Lin could not let Lin Yun and the others continue to cause trouble endlessly. From the overall situation, now was not the time to start a war. Moreover, the old guys in the origin world were obviously not willing to see such an outcome. Since they could not start a war, they could only choose to compromise. They had to withdraw Mo He and the others and reconcile with Lin Yun temporarily. Mo Lin exhaled and said to the expert from the demon abyss in front of him, "Release the news that I will meet Lin Yun alone at Heavenly Devil Ridge tomorrow." Mo Lin wanted to meet Lin Yun personally. He was not worried that Lin Yun would refuse because this was the result that Lin Yun had been waiting for. At the same time, when the news came out, it proved that Mo Lin had made a choice and had no choice but to compromise. Chapter 2593. Lin Yun could easily find out about the news that Mo Lin had released. Hearing that Mo Lin wanted to meet her alone, Lin Yun smiled faintly and did not refuse. Lin Yun could easily find out about the news that Mo Lin had released. Hearing that Mo Lin wanted to meet her alone, Lin Yun smiled faintly and did not refuse. She told Xiao Chen, Lin Hu, and the others to find a safe place to wait for her. As for herself, she would go to Omen Ridge alone to meet Mo Lin. Omen Ridge was originally located in the Omen continent. However, because of the previous battle, the entire Omen continent had almost fallen apart. The original continent had been directly torn apart into 5 small continents. Of course, there were also many fragments. Omen Ridge should be the only place that was still intact. The reason why Mo Lin had arranged to meet Lin Yun at Omen Ridge was that he was afraid that Lin Yun would be suspicious. Otherwise, Mo Lin could have arranged for them to meet in the Demon Abyss. Mo Lin wanted to meet Lin Yun at Omen Ridge because he wanted to tell her that he had no intention of ambushing her. She could come without any worries. Regarding this, Li Tian, Lin Hu, and the others were not worried about Lin Yun at all. They also did not insist on going alone. First of all, at this point, Mo Lin would not make such a stupid choice to ambush Lin Yun. This would only make things difficult for both sides. Second, Lin Yun went alone. Even if Mo Lin had set an ambush, Lin Yun would be more likely to succeed if she went alone. Of course, Li Tian and the others would provide support outside to ensure that nothing went wrong. Lin Yun went to Omen Ridge alone. After Li Tian and the others met up, they also went to the void not far from Omen Ridge to wait. Looking at Xiao Chen, who was standing on the deck with a worried face, Tyrant said heartlessly, "Xiao Chen, don't worry. Even if Mo Lin and the others set an ambush, they can't do anything to Palace Master." Tyrant knew that Xiao Chen was worried about Lin Yun. In response, Li Tian came to Xiao Chen and said faintly, "It's not as easy as you think to besiege and kill a world master. It's even more difficult when Palace Master has nothing to worry about. If everyone went together, Lin Yun would have to take care of them. Perhaps Mo Lin's chances of success would be higher." However, Lin Yun went alone. She had nothing to worry about. She would pay a price and she could retreat. Everyone was not worried about Lin Yun's safety. At the same time, Lin Yun also went to Omen Ridge as promised. Along the way, Lin Yun did not notice anything unusual. When Lin Yun arrived at Omen Ridge, Mo Lin was waiting for her. He was indeed alone. There was a wooden table and 2 futons on the main peak of Omen Ridge. Mo Lin sat cross-legged. There was no one else around. When he saw Lin Yun arrive, Mo Lin just looked up and said faintly, "Sit." Lin Yun did not stand on ceremony. She sat directly opposite Mo He. The two of them sat facing each other and looked at each other. Mo Lin still said angrily, "Lin Yun, aren't you going to leave? If you leave the great devil world now, I can pretend that nothing happened." Mo He knew what Lin Yun wanted, but he still wasn't willing to compromise. However, Lin Yun didn't even pay attention to his words. Lin Yun simply sneered and replied, "What do you think? You asked me to come here just to say this? If that's the case, there's no need to talk anymore." Mo Lin knew what Lin Yun wanted. Hence, Lin Yun did not want to hear these meaningless words. Seeing this, Mo He's eyes flashed with anger. However, it was only for a moment. Soon, he regained his composure and said, "You should know what the old guys in the origin world are thinking. It's meaningless for us to fight to the death. I believe you don't want that to happen." "That's right. So what?" Lin Yun said faintly. Indeed, now was not the time to fight to the death. Lin Yun knew this very well. However, Lin Yun did not want to fight to the death. Instead, she wanted Mo Lin to withdraw Mo He and the others. It was that simple. Mo Lin had already defeated Mo Lin. Since he was willing to come today, he had already made his choice. He was only saying these words because he was unwilling to give up. Seeing Lin Yun's stubborn look, Mo Lin looked at Lin Yun coldly. Lin Yun did not avoid his gaze. The two of them looked at each other for a long time. Finally, Mo Lin said, "I can withdraw Mo He and the others. I promise that we will not interfere with anything in the Great Thousand World in the future. However, someone has to compensate for the losses you have caused in the Great Devil World." Mo Lin had no choice but to agree to everything Lin Yun wanted. At the same time, he asked for compensation. Lin Yun smiled faintly. Did the compensation mean anything to Mo Lin? Obviously, he did not. Mo Lin would not be distressed by the loss of hundreds of spirit veins, nor would he be distressed by the destruction of 1 or 2 continents. The reason why he asked for compensation was to disgust Lin Yun and also to save his face. This amount of compensation was basically meaningless to Mo Lin and the entire demon abyss. To put it bluntly, even if Mo Lin was compensated, he would probably use it to reward other forces in the Great Devil World. The smile on Lin Yun's face became brighter. Looking at Mo Lin, she said with a smile, "All right, I'll compensate you." Lin Yun could not be bothered to bargain with Mo Lin over such a small compensation. Seeing that Lin Yun had agreed so readily, Mo Lin was not surprised at all. As they were both world lords, he did not care about the compensation. Naturally, Lin Yun did not care about it either. The negotiation went very smoothly. Mo Lin also promised to send a message to Mo He and the rest today. Tomorrow, Mo He and the rest would leave the primordial world. However, Mo Lin also said that the people from the demon abyss would leave, but he could not do anything about the people from the evil sect. Of course, Mo Lin would also contact the person from the evil sect and persuade him to give up interfering in the affairs of the Great Thousand World. Lin Yun did not care about this at all. She smiled and said, "It doesn't matter, as long as the people from the demon abyss leave." If the people from the demon abyss left, how could the people from the evil sect not leave? Unless the person from the evil sect thought that he could fight against the Cloud Palace and the Immortal Palace at the same time. Of course, this was impossible. Unless the person from the evil sect had lost his mind, it was impossible for him to have such an idea. After everything was settled, Mo Lin obviously did not intend to stay any longer. He got up and said coldly to Lin Yun before leaving, "Lin Yun, get out of the great devil world as soon as possible. If you have any other ideas, I promise that I'll take you down with me regardless of the consequences." After speaking, without waiting for Lin Yun to reply, he disappeared from where he was. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2594. Mo Lin obviously could not stay with Lin Yun, even for a second. Lin Yun shook her head and smiled bitterly. She did not care too much and stood up to leave. Mo Lin obviously could not stay with Lin Yun, even for a second. Lin Yun shook her head and smiled bitterly. She did not care too much and stood up to leave. Lin Yun could understand Mo Lin's feelings. After all, they had turned the great devil world upside down. If it were not for various reasons, Mo Lin would not have lowered his head. On the way out of Omen Ridge, Lin Yun recalled Mo Lin's expression when he left and could not help but laugh. However, she soon thought of the old guys in the origin world, and her face became solemn. What exactly are these old guys planning? Everything was because of the origin world. Regardless of whether it was Lin Yun or Mo Lin, they could not ignore the origin world. It was the origin of many universes. Moreover, those who could come into contact with the origin world had to be at least at the ancestor realm. This showed how mysterious the origin world was. When Lin Yun thought of the origin world, she felt a headache coming on. She could not figure out what the old guys were planning. However, the goal of the trip to the great devil world this time was successfully achieved. First, Xiao Chen had broken through to the ancestor realm. Then, he had successfully forced Mo Lin to withdraw he and the others. He had resolved the war in the Hong Meng world, and the danger in the Great Thousand World had been resolved. When they returned to the spatial spirit boat and saw that Lin Yun had returned safely, Xiao Chen heaved a sigh of relief. He then asked, "Palace Master Lin, how was it?" "Everything is settled. However, Mo Lin asked me for compensation." "Ha!" Lin Yun laughed when she heard that. Not only Lin Yun, but the rest of the monks, Taoist priests, Lin Hu, and the others also laughed loudly when they heard that. "I didn't expect Mo Lin to be so good at managing his family," the monk said without thinking. Even Xiao Chen was speechless. Mo Lin had no choice but to compromise. However, he was still angry. Otherwise, he would not have asked for compensation. No one cared much about this small amount of compensation. To the Cloud Palace, this amount of compensation was a drop in the bucket. They could just give it to him. When Lin Yun returned to the spatial spirit boat, Mo Lin sent a message to he and the others in the primordial world, telling them to leave the primordial world immediately and return to the demon abyss. When he received Mo Lin's message, he was not surprised at all. It was as though it was only a matter of time. In the Hong Meng world, he and a group of experts from the demon abyss gathered together in a spaceship and told them about Mo Lin's message. Everyone had a complicated look on their faces. This time, the incident in the Great Thousand World was really strange. Furthermore, the demon abyss had paid a heavy price for this. "Get ready to leave. I'll talk to the people from the evil sect," he said faintly as he looked at the crowd. There were some things that he could not interfere with. For example, the incident in the origin world. In the origin world, an ancestor realm expert like he was just a pawn. The people who could really speak were the world masters of the various universes. So, no matter what had happened in the origin world or what those old fellows were planning, it wasn't something he should care about. Lin would deal with it, and all he needed to do was listen to Lin's orders. Moreover, the war in the Hong Meng world was meaningless. They had sacrificed so much for the Great Thousand World. It had already exceeded the benefits that they had gained. It was not worth it to continue fighting. Keep an eye on things. Therefore, he did not object to Lin's order to retreat. He also did not say that he had to fight to the death with Lin Yuan and the others. After the war in the Hong Meng world was over, he and the other experts from the demon abyss retreated from the Hong Meng world. The people from the evil sect followed closely behind. Lin Yun and Gong Nantian did not stop them from leaving. They just watched from afar. Gong Nantian stood side by side and watched the people from the demon abyss and evil sect enter the spatial black hole. He sighed and said, "It's really an eventful period. Those old fellows in the origin world, haha. I can't see through them. It's really an eventful period. I reckon there will be some movement in the origin world soon," Lin Yuan said faintly. The incident in the Great Thousand World this time seemed to be a competition between the Cloud Palace, Immortal Palace, Demon Abyss, and Evil Sect. However, it was all because of the Origin World. The Origin World was the first to discover the Great Thousand World. It was also the order of those old fellows in the Origin World that caused the competition in the Great Thousand World to be so intense. In the end, the four universes were directly involved. Nothing like this had happened before. Even when the world masters of the Hong Meng world and the Hong Meng world were born, the Origin World did not have such a reaction. Their reaction was indeed rather strange, and it could even be said that it was rather confusing. Everyone could see that the old fellows in the Origin World were acting strangely. At the same time, in the Righteous Path Alliance in the Origin World, 3 blurry figures sat together on a mountain surrounded by clouds. There was a chessboard at the center, and 2 of them were playing chess while the third was watching from the side. Chess pieces were constantly falling down. One of them held a black chess piece, and as soon as he made a move, the black chess piece above him instantly turned into a black dragon that soared into the sky. Then, the person who had placed the chess piece said indifferently, "The black dragon has taken form. It's a sign of great chaos." That's not necessarily true. Destruction and establishment is the right path. The other person did not care about the white chess pieces that had been slaughtered to the point that they had abandoned their armor. He chuckled and continued to place his chess pieces in a seemingly casual manner. In an instant, the white chess pieces that had been on the verge of defeat seemed to come back to life. The white chess pieces surrounded the black dragon and slowly nibbled at it. Seeing this scene on the chessboard, the 3 of them could not help but laugh loudly. Naturally, no one knew about the conversation between the 3 of them. No one would have thought that they were playing a huge game of chess, using the world as the chessboard and all living beings as chess pieces. Perhaps even the world masters had become chess pieces. Outsiders had no way of knowing what was happening in the Origin World. Xiao Chun, Lin Yun, and the others had left the Great Devil World according to their agreement. Lin Yuan had sent a message saying that he and the others had retreated, and so had the people from Evil Sect. Lin Yun and the others naturally did not need to stay in the Great Devil World. Moreover, the current situation was really not suitable to provoke Lin. Even a rabbit would want someone when it was anxious, not to mention that Lin was not a rabbit but a raging dragon. It was meaningless to provoke him now. Instead, it would be counterproductive. Therefore, Lin Yun and the others did not stay for too long. They directly chose to leave the Great Devil World and prepared to return to the Hong Meng world. Chapter 2595 Lin Yun, Shao Chen, and the others left the great devil world and returned to the macro world. They did not encounter any danger along the way, and Mo Lin did not use any trick. It seemed that he really did not want to continue to be in a stalemate with Lin Yun. It would not benefit anyone if this continued. Lin Yun, Shao Chen, and the others left the great devil world and returned to the macro world. They did not encounter any danger along the way, and Mo Lin did not use any trick. It seemed that he really did not want to continue to be in a stalemate with Lin Yun. It would not benefit anyone if this continued. The matter in the great devil world came to an end. With the departure of Mo Yuan and the evil sect experts, the Hong Meng world gradually began to regain its peace. Lin Yuan and the others stayed in the Hong Meng world for a few days. After confirming that Mo Yuan and the evil sect experts had really left, they bid farewell and returned to the macro world. Compared to Lin Yuan and the others, Lin Yun, Shao Chen, and the others naturally returned to the macro world one step faster. After arriving at the Cloud Palace, Shao Chen saw Qin Shuru and the others as soon as he got off the spatial spirit boat. Seeing that Shao Chen was fine, the girls were secretly relieved. This time, Shao Chen followed Lin Yun to the great devil world. The girls were really worried that Shao Chen would be in danger. Fortunately, Shao Chen finally returned safely. They hugged each other, but they did not see Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. Shao Chen asked curiously, "Where did the two little ones go?" As they grew older, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao's personalities became more and more lively. They were just like wild horses out of control. Their curiosity about the outside world also increased day by day. Although they did not dare to tell Shao Chen, the two boys had expressed their desire to go out and experience more than once in front of Qin Shuru and the others. According to their own words, like father, like son. As Shao Chen's sons, how could they be good-for-nothings? Therefore, they had to be like their father and become strong. In response to Shao Chen's question, Bai Hua Fairy smiled and said, "Those two kids went out to train with Lin Feng and Lin Shui. Did he go out to train?" Hearing this, Shao Chen was a little dissatisfied for a moment. These two little fellows were going out to gain strength at such a young age. Wasn't this nonsense? What if there was any danger? Perhaps seeing through Shao Chen's thoughts, Hundred Flower Fairy smiled and said, "Don't worry, Hongxiu, Ling Yao, and the others are all going with them. Even Lady Qinzhu is going with them. Nothing will happen." Qinzhu, Shao Chen knew, was one of Lin Yun's wives, and was also an ancestor realm cultivator. Hearing this, Shao Chen was relieved. Thinking of the two boys who were becoming more and more restless, Shao Chen also secretly decided that after returning to the Great Thousand World, he should arrange for the two to go out and gain strength. Otherwise, it would not be a good idea for them to always protect him. How could flowers that grew up in a greenhouse be able to withstand the attack of a violent storm in the future? Moreover, these two boys always imagined the outside world to be too beautiful. Originally, there was nothing wrong with this for children, but sooner or later, they had to know the dangers of the world. Otherwise, they would become bad people. Although one should not have the intention to harm others, one must be vigilant. Only by experiencing these things personally could one know how to protect oneself. With this thought in mind, Shao Chen and Lin Yun said goodbye and then returned to their residence. Hongxiu and Gu Lingyao accompanied Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao out, leaving only Qin Shuru, Hundred Flower Fairy, and Tianyue by his side. After not seeing each other for several months, everyone naturally missed each other very much. Naturally, they could not help but be affectionate that night. After a silent night, early the next morning, Shao Chen asked about Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Jun Wuya, and the others. After learning that they were all out training, Shao Chen did not think too much about it. Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing, except for half-step progenitor realm experts, almost no one was their opponent. As for Jun Wuya, there was even less of a need to worry. In addition, this was the macro world, so there should not be too much of a problem. However, many times, things went contrary to one's wishes. Just when Xiao Chen thought that he could accompany Qin Shuru and the others in peace for a period of time, some bad news came from the ancient barons' continent at this time. The purpose of this news was naturally related to the great sage of the ancient barons. Some time ago, the appearance of the great sage of the ancient barons' ruins attracted many warriors from the macro world. Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others were like everyone else. They entered the ruins to see if they could obtain any opportunities. This should have been a good thing, but now things had become a little strange. Those who entered the ruins were fine at first, but after a few days, their life tablets began to shatter. The shattering of the life tablet was equivalent to death. In fact, it was not strange if that was all. After all, the appearance of any ruins was dangerous. Everyone knew this in their hearts. However, the shattering of these life tablets was somewhat different. They were completely shattered but not broken. Many dense cracks appeared on the life tablets, which meant that the owner of the life tablet should have died. However, the life tablets were not completely shattered, which was very strange. Even in the Cloud Palace, the same thing happened to the life tablets of many disciples. It even attracted Lin Yun's attention at this time. In the Cloud Palace's life tablet hall, Lin Yun, Li Tian, and Xiao Chen, who took the initiative to rush over after hearing the news, looked at the dozens of shattered life tablets in front of them. These life tablets were full of cracks, but they were not completely shattered. Frowning slightly, Lin Yun said faintly, "What's this situation? The life tablets are shattered but not broken. Does this mean that they are dead? Such a thing has never happened before. However, in my opinion, there can only be one explanation for the life tablets not breaking. Either the soul was destroyed and the body was fine, or the body was destroyed and the soul was fine. Otherwise, such a situation would not occur." Hearing this, Li Tian opened his mouth and said. Li Tian's guess was not unreasonable. This was the only way to explain why the life tablets were not shattered. However, what kind of situation could cause the soul to be destroyed and the body to be fine? Or the body to be destroyed and the soul to be fine? Lin Yun and Li Tian were indeed unable to determine what had happened in the ruins of the great saint of the ancients. Xiao Chen on the side was also worried. He did not know the situation of Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing. However, their life tablets were still in the Cloud Palace. Xiao Chen did not know the situation at all. He could not be sure if the two of them were like the disciples of the Cloud Palace, whose life tablets were shattered but not broken. With some worries in his heart, Xiao Chen had to speak up. The answer is in the ruins. If you want to know the result, I think the easiest way is to enter the ruins directly. Xiao Chen definitely had to go to the ruins personally. After all, the situation was a little strange. Moreover, there was no news of Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing. Xiao Chen naturally could not sit still. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 2596. It was indeed very strange that the life jade was broken but not broken. Therefore, Lin Yun did not refuse after hearing Xiao Chen's words. Knowing that Xiao Chen was worried about Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing, Lin Yun simply said, "Then let Li Tian go with you." She knew that Xiao Chen would definitely go in person. Even if she tried to persuade him, it would be useless. Therefore, she might as well fulfill his wish. Moreover, Xiao Chen was also in the progenitor realm. The great sage of the ancients was also in the progenitor realm when he was alive. With Xiao Chen's strength, there should be no problem in entering the ruins left by an progenitor realm powerhouse. Hearing Lin Yun's words, Xiao Chen naturally would not refuse. Moreover, with Li Tian going with him, it would obviously save a lot of trouble. After all, he had seen Li Tian's ability before. After the matter was settled, Xiao Chen first returned to his residence and informed Qin Shuru and the other girls. Originally, the girls wanted to go with him, but they were rejected by Xiao Chen. Now that the situation was unclear, Xiao Chen naturally could not let the girls be in danger with him. After speaking to the girls, Xiao Chen and Li Tian immediately rushed to the ancient baron's continent without delay. Many forces had already discovered that something was wrong. At the same time, in the ruins of the great sage of the ancients, many warriors who entered the ruins at this time did indeed encounter extremely troublesome matters. This relic was not as complicated as they had imagined, and there was no such thing as a test. After entering the relic, everyone arrived at a barren plain. The plain was not large, and in the sky, there was an ancient palace suspended in the sky. However, at this time, there were warriors hanging around the palace. They were shrouded in an inexplicable liquid like a liquid cocoon, trapping everyone. At this time, these people had their eyes closed, and it was impossible to tell if they were dead or alive. This was probably the reason why the life jade was broken in the outside world. These warriors who were shrouded in an inexplicable liquid seemed to have lost their vital signs, but they were not truly dead. It was a very strange relic. Other than those who were already trapped, there were still a few people who were bitterly holding on, including Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing. As soon as everyone entered the ruins, a rain of sand began to fall from the sky. That's right, it was a rain of sand. Once this rain of sand fell on a person's body, it would quickly liquefy. This was also the reason why so many people were controlled by this unknown liquid. At first, everyone was caught off guard. However, they soon realized that something was wrong and began to use their own spiritual power to resist. However, for those martial artists with lower cultivation, even if they used their spiritual power, it was basically useless. They were quickly corroded. Only a small number of Emperor Realm cultivators like Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing were able to resist and hold on until now. They kept moving away from the ancient palace in the sky. At that moment, Xianyuan Ling and his group had come to a valley to hide temporarily. There were about a dozen people, including Dao Ju and Xiao Xiao. As for Li Chun and the others, they had unfortunately been controlled by the sand rain. Other than the four of them, there were also some cultivators from the Great World. At this moment, everyone gathered together with a dignified look on their faces. This ruin is a bit strange. There is neither an assessment nor any reward. Moreover, this sand rain is extremely dangerous. One of the cultivators from the Great World, who had gathered together, said. Everyone present was able to cultivate to the Emperor Realm. Naturally, they had gone through a lot of experiences. They had also entered many ruins like this, but they had never encountered such a situation. As this person's voice fell, Xiao Xiao, who had been silent all this time, spoke up slowly. I always feel that this ruin is like a trap. Someone deliberately set it up. A trap? Hearing Xiao Xiao's words, everyone present was stunned. They then murmured suspiciously. If this ruin was a trap, then who set it up? What was their purpose? Facing everyone's doubts, Xiao Xiao straightforwardly spoke out the conjecture in her heart. According to Xiao Xiao's guess, there were no treasures in this ruin at all, let alone inheritances. The opening of this ruin must have been deliberately done by someone to achieve some purpose. As for what this purpose was, it was probably related to everyone. Perhaps that person wanted to lure everyone into this place, then control them through the sand rain and seize their flesh and souls. I have carefully sensed that although those who were controlled by the sand rain did not die directly, their souls and flesh were constantly disappearing. There must be someone behind this. Hearing Xiao Zhao's words, everyone present was stunned. If this was the case, then weren't they all turtles in a jar now? It was difficult for them to accept this fact for a while, but judging from the current situation, Xiao Zhao's guess was probably correct. After all, this ruin in front of them was not normal at all. We can't just sit here and wait for death. We must find a way to leave. At the very least, we must spread the news to the outside world. As soon as Xiao Zhao's voice fell, a cultivator from the Great World spoke up. Staying here, they could hide for a while, but could they hide forever? Therefore, they had to find a way to leave. At the very least, they had to find a way to spread the news. But how could they leave? It was not that everyone had not tried before, but the surrounding space was simply abnormally solid, as if it was protected by some kind of power. With their cultivation and strength, there was no way to tear it apart. There was no way to tear the space, nor could they find any exit. As for the entrance that everyone had entered before, it had long disappeared or been directly closed. Anyway, it was impossible. Just as everyone was thinking of a way to escape, in the ancient palace in the sky, blood was constantly flowing into a dried corpse. The dried corpse's skin was extremely dry, and there was almost no flesh and blood left. Only some skin and bones were left. It looked extremely terrifying. However, with the continuous flow of blood from all around, it was obvious that the dried corpse began to slowly recover its vitality. The originally shriveled body began to slowly expand like a balloon. Moreover, in addition to the blood chi, there was also an inexplicable power that was constantly flowing into the dried corpse. This power was very similar to the power of the soul. It was probably the power of the soul. As time passed, the fingers of the dried corpse in the palace moved slightly. A corpse that should have been dead for many years seemed to have come back to life at this time. If someone was here, they would probably recognize at a glance that the dried corpse in front of them was the owner of this ruin, the great sage of the ancients. Request collection, request monthly votes, request recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 2597. The great sage of the ancients was a figure who had been dead for many years. At least before the appearance of the Cloud Palace, the great sage of the ancients was already dead, and the era that belonged to him was naturally over. The great sage of the ancients was a figure who had been dead for many years. At least before the appearance of the Cloud Palace, the great sage of the ancients was already dead, and the era that belonged to him was naturally over. However, such a figure who should have been dead for tens of thousands of years was gradually coming back to life. The originally withered corpse was now slowly exuding traces of vitality, just like a withered tree coming back to life. As for where the blood and soul power came from, needless to say, it must have come from the warriors trapped in the sand rain. The outside world could clearly see that the bodies of the warriors were slowly drying up, as if the flesh and blood in their bodies were being sucked dry. Just as Xiao Xiao had guessed, the so-called remains of the great sage of the ancients was a scam from the beginning, a trap, and the person who had arranged all of this was probably the great sage of the ancients himself. Perhaps as early as tens of thousands of years ago, before the fall of the great sage of the ancients, he had already arranged all of this. He had been waiting for such an opportunity to use the temptation of his inheritance and treasures to deceive the warriors of the outside world into entering here, and then devour their flesh and soul power to revive himself. However, such a method was extremely strange, but it was not difficult to accept. After all, an old monster like the great sage of the ancients, who had lived for so many years, would have some trump card. Of course, it was impossible for outsiders to know that this resurrection method was actually obtained by the great sage of the ancients by chance. It was not just a simple review method, but also a secret method to break through to the ancestor realm. That's right, through this secret method, it could help people break through to the ancestor realm without the help of the origin energy. Above the ancestor realm was the Lord of the world. However, to break through to the Lord of the world, one must obtain the recognition of the origin energy. Although the great sage of the ancients was amazing in the past, he still did not obtain the recognition of the origin energy. The great sage of the ancients was unwilling to stop at the ancestor realm. Although the ancestor realm experts were already considered heroes and could even achieve immortality, the great sage of the ancients was unwilling to accept this. By chance, the great sage of the ancients had obtained this mystic technique. According to the mystic technique, in order to successfully cultivate this mystic technique, one must experience the cycle of life and death. Thus, it could be said that the great sage of the ancients had deliberately committed suicide. It was not because of some accident at all. Instead, the reason why he had committed suicide was because of this secret technique, so that he could break through to the ancestor realm. Becoming the Lord of the world was the obsession of the great saint of the ancients. For this, he was willing to pay any price. Therefore, the great saint of the ancients had set up this trap in the past. It was only now, tens of thousands of years later, that he truly began to awaken. After going through a life and death experience and going through a reincarnation cycle, the secret technique had been completed. The great sage of the ancients was now beginning to revive, and he now had the possibility of becoming a world lord. However, this secret art was far too bloody. Others might not know, but great sage of the ancients was well aware of it. If it wasn't through the power of essence, then what was it through? It was through the power of all living beings. According to the secret method, after the great sage of the ancients successfully completed the first step, the next step was to plunder the power of all living beings. However, for the great sage of the ancients to successfully break through to the ancestor realm and become a world lord, it was estimated that at least half of the people in the entire great world would have to die. It could be said that it was simply insane. However, in order to break through to the ancestor realm, the great sage of the ancients no longer had so many considerations. No matter what, he had to break through to the Lord of the world and become a true ruler. With the continuous influx of flesh and soul power, the vitality of the great sage of the ancients became increasingly rich. After an unknown period of time, although the great sage of the ancients' body was still withered, it was far better than before. Moreover, the great sage of the ancients' eyes slowly opened. At first, there was no expression in his eyes, but as time passed, the gaze in his eyes slowly began to focus. "I'm back." After a long while, the great sage of the ancients whispered softly, and the look in his eyes became abnormally firm. Successful resurrection. After tens of thousands of years, the great sage of the ancients had finally returned. If this news were to spread, the great sage of the ancients did not hesitate to commit suicide in order to find a trace of opportunity to break through to the ancestor realm. It was all for this moment. However, although the resurrection was successful, it was not difficult to see that the great sage of the ancients was still very weak at this time. However, it did not matter. Outside the palace, the people who had been controlled by the sand rain at this time had enough flesh and soul power for the great sage of the ancients to break through. Although it was impossible for the great sage of the ancients to directly break through to the ancestor realm, it was not a problem for him to restore his cultivation when he was alive. The great sage of the ancients scanned with his divine sense and soon found Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, and the other fish that had escaped the net. A faint smile appeared on his shriveled lips. "I didn't expect there to be fish that escaped the net. However, this was not important. Anyway, in this ruin, these little guys could not escape at all. When the time came, they would still be devoured and refined by him and become his nourishment." He was not in a hurry to deal with Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, and the others. The most important thing for the great sage of the ancients was to recover. After being dead for tens of thousands of years, although the great sage of the ancients had been resurrected using a secret method, he was still very weak. He would first restore his strength when he was alive, then leave this ruin and begin to break through to the ancestor realm. The great sage of the ancients did not know the current situation of the great world. The great world had ushered in a new era, a new overlord, a new world lord. And his actions were undoubtedly provoking Lin Yun's authority. Just think about it, could two world masters appear in a universe? It was obviously impossible. It was the same principle as two tigers could not live on one mountain. If Lin Yun knew that the great sage of the ancients had been planning to use this method to break through to the ancestor realm and become a world lord since tens of thousands of years ago, Lin Yun would have torn him to pieces. However, it did not matter. Although the great sage of the ancients had been successfully resurrected, Shao Chun and Li Tian were also on their way here. As long as the two of them entered the ruin personally, they would naturally discover all of the great sage of the ancients' plans. By then, Lin Yun would naturally know. They did not know that the outside world was no longer the same as it was tens of thousands of years ago. At this time, there was only one overlord in the great world, and that was the Cloud Palace. He focused on recovering his cultivation. After the resurrection of the great sage of the ancients, the speed of devouring was obviously much faster. The bodies of the warriors outside who were controlled by the sand rain began to rapidly shrivel, and the power of their souls was rapidly drained. One by one, they turned into emaciated corpses, and their power of souls was also completely drained. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2598. Inside the ruins, the great sage of the ancients was frantically absorbing everyone's flesh and soul power. Outside the ruins, many experts from various forces had already gathered. Inside the ruins, the great sage of the ancients was frantically absorbing everyone's flesh and soul power. Outside the ruins, many experts from various forces had already gathered. However, the strongest among them was only at the half-step progenitor realm. It was impossible for them to forcibly break the seal left behind by the great sage of the ancients. Everyone sensed that something was wrong and hurried over. However, no one could break the seal in front of them, which made them anxious. How is it? Is there still no one from the Cloud Palace? Someone asked. They could only rely on the Cloud Palace now. Hearing this, a half-step progenitor realm expert arrived. I have contacted the Cloud Palace. It is said that Palace Master Li Tian is already on his way. That's good, that's good. Hearing that the Cloud Palace had already sent a palace master on his way, everyone secretly breathed a sigh of relief. In the face of an Ancestor Realm expert, the seal left behind by the great sage of the ancients could only be forcibly broken by an Ancestor Realm expert. Since the Cloud Palace had sent a palace master, there shouldn't be any problem. Without a way to break the seal and enter the ruins, everyone could only wait quietly. Just like that, Shao Chen and Li Tian hurried over a day later. There was almost no delay along the way. In just one day, they rushed from the Cloud Palace to the ancient Baron's continent and arrived outside the ruins of the great sage of the ancients. Seeing the arrival of Li Tian and Shao Chen, many people present recognized Shao Chen. After all, Lin Yun's kill order had shaken the entire great world. Many people had participated in the hunt for Shao Chen. Of course, most people had suffered losses at the hands of Shao Chen. Seeing many familiar faces, the crowd was obviously not in the mood to pay attention to them. They immediately cupped their hands and bowed to Li Tian. Greetings, Palace Master. In response, Li Tian only nodded slightly. Immediately after, he and Shao Chen came to the original entrance of the ruins. However, the entrance had long been closed, and the surroundings were filled with seals left behind by the great sage of the ancients to block everyone. After observing for a while, Shao Chen said somewhat impatiently, "Break it by force." "That's fine too. This ruin is indeed strange. Let's go in and take a look after breaking the restriction." Li Tian did not reject Shao Chen's suggestion. He could understand why Shao Chen was so anxious. After all, Li Tian knew a little about the relationship between him, Xian Yuanling, and Long Qing. Just like the brothers in the Cloud Palace, they were all friends who could risk their lives for each other. Upon hearing Li Tian's words, Shao Chen did not hesitate at all. His progenitor realm aura soared into the sky as he prepared to forcefully break the seal left behind by the great sage of the ancients. As Shao Chen's aura erupted, everyone present turned to look at Shao Chen in shock, especially the few half-step ancestor stage experts. They still remembered that when they fought Shao Chen less than a year ago, Although Xiao Chen's battle strength was extraordinary and did not seem like a half-step ancestor stage expert at all, Xiao Chen's cultivation had not yet broken through to the ancestor stage at that time. However, how long had it been since then? Xiao Chen had already successfully stepped into the threshold of the ancestor stage. Now, Xiao Chen was a true ancestor stage expert. For a moment, everyone present was shocked. Since when was it so easy to break through to the ancestor stage? 101 Chinese Network, but why were they stuck at the half-step ancestor stage for so many years? Moreover, there was no progress at all, and the barrier between the realms showed no signs of loosening. Comparisons were odious. However, Xiao Chen was clearly not in the mood to pay attention to them at this time. Facing the restriction in front of him, he slashed out with his sword and directly displayed the Emperor's sword. The tip of the sword struck the restriction fiercely. For a moment, layers of ripples appeared on the restriction, but it did not break. However, Xiao Chen's attack did not stop at this time. Another 3 sword strikes struck the same spot. If the first attack did not work, then he would try a second attack. If 2 attacks did not work, then he would try a third. Under Xiao Chen's relentless attacks, cracks finally appeared on the barrier. Then, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the barrier was finally broken by Xiao Chen with a muffled sound. Although Xiao Chen's cultivation was only at the initial stage of the ancestor stage, Xiao Chen's battle strength was heaven-defying. Therefore, there was no reason that he could not break the restriction left behind by the great sage of the ancients. After the restriction was broken, Xiao Chen and Li Tian looked at each other. Then, the two of them rushed directly into the ruins without stopping. Seeing this, many experts around also followed closely behind. With the 2 ancestor stage experts, Xiao Chen and Li Tian, opening the way, everyone was naturally not worried at all. After all, the great sage of the ancients was only at the ancestor stage. When he was alive, he might not be a match for Li Tian and Xiao Chen, let alone when he was dead. Everyone rushed into the ruins. At the same time, the great sage of the ancients, who was in the ruins, naturally sensed it immediately. In fact, as early as the moment the restriction was broken by Xiao Chen, the great sage of the ancients felt that the restriction was broken. Moreover, the one who did it was obviously an ancestor stage expert. Someone had forced their way into the ruins. Although the great sage of the ancients was unhappy about this, there was nothing he could do. He reckoned that the matter of the ruins had been exposed. After all, so many people were controlled by him, and then he devoured their flesh and soul power. It would be difficult for the outside world not to notice. Fortunately, when Li Tian and Xiao Chen broke the restriction, the great sage of the ancients had recovered a lot of his strength. Those who were controlled by the sand rain were almost completely devoured by the great sage of the ancients. At this time, the great sage of the ancients seemed to have recovered. His originally withered body had also become strong, and was no different from when he was alive. Moreover, there was a strong spiritual energy fluctuation surrounding the great saint of the ancients. Through this spiritual energy fluctuation, one could clearly sense that the great saint of the ancients' cultivation had recovered to the level of a full-fledged ancestor. The great sage of the ancients' cultivation base was enough to protect himself. Even if the intruder was an ancestor stage expert, there was no need to worry. After all, the great sage of the ancients was one of the strongest existences in the ancestor stage. The great sage of the ancients had completely absorbed everyone's flesh and soul power. Outside the palace, the people who were like cocoons had all turned into dried corpses. When Xiao Chen and Li Tian arrived, they saw this scene at a glance. Looking at the dried corpses, they couldn't help but be stunned. Xiao Chen also saw the figures of Li Chun, Dan Xian, and the others. However, at this time, Li Chun, Dan Xian, and the others had also turned into dried corpses, and there was no trace of life. For a moment, Xiao Chen only felt a boom in his head, and the anger in his heart unconsciously surged. Sure enough, something had happened. Li Chun and Dan Xian were like this. What about Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing? Xiao Chen didn't dare to think about it. Chapter 2599. Xiao Chen quickly scanned the corpses that resembled cocoons. He wanted to find Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing, but there were too many corpses. Xiao Chen couldn't find them accurately. While Xiao Chen was looking for Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing, the figure of the great sage of the ancients slowly walked out of the hall. He was only wearing a pair of simple shorts, and his upper body was naked. However, his complexion was ruddy, and his vitality was vigorous. He didn't look like someone who had been dead for tens of thousands of years. Everyone was stunned when they saw the great sage of the ancient. Then, someone recognized the great sage of the ancient. Although the great sage of the ancients had been dead for tens of thousands of years, he was still the most famous expert in the ancient Baron's mainland. Even a continent was named after him. There were statues of the great sage of the ancients in many places in the ancient Baron's mainland. His appearance was almost identical to the great sage of the ancients. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that someone recognized the great sage of the ancients when they saw him. The great sage of the ancients? How is that possible? Someone looked at the great sage of the ancients outside the palace in shock. Xiao Chen, Li Tian, and the others looked at the great sage of the ancients. The great sage of the ancients smiled slightly and said, I didn't expect that after so many years, there are still people who remember me. The corner of his mouth held a playful smile. However, Xiao Chen and Li Tian frowned when they saw the great sage of the ancients who had come back from the dead. From the current situation, they were almost certain that the great sage of the ancients was behind all of this. However, what Xiao Chen and Li Tian couldn't figure out was why the great sage of the ancients was still alive. How could a person who had been dead for tens of thousands of years be resurrected? Or was the great sage of the ancients still alive from the beginning to the end? This wasn't impossible. After all, an ancestor realm expert was almost immortal. It wasn't strange for him to live for tens of thousands of years. Xiao Chen locked his gaze directly on the great sage of the ancients and asked coldly, Are you behind all of this? If the great sage of the ancients was behind all of this, then Xiao Chen would never let him go. In response to Xiao Chen's question, the great sage of the ancients' smile widened. I just borrowed their flesh and soul power. I didn't do anything else, right? The supreme saint of the ancients shrugged as he spoke. It was obvious that he did not take Xiao Chen seriously at all. Naturally, he was able to tell Xiao Chen's level of cultivation at a glance. Xiao Chen was indeed a cultivator of the progenitor realm, but he had only just broken through to the progenitor realm. The great saint of the ancients did not care about his level of cultivation. When Xiao Chen heard the great sage of the ancients' words, the coldness in his eyes instantly exploded. Since the great sage of the ancients admitted that he was behind all of this, then Xiao Chen naturally wouldn't hold back. He would kill the great sage of the ancients first and then search for the traces of Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing. Without further ado, Xiao Chen took a step forward and with a thought, the dustless sword instantly appeared in his hand. Since you've admitted it, then it's easy to deal with. After saying that, Xiao Chen slashed out with his sword. The Emperor's sword instantly erupted and the blade, which didn't seem to have much fluctuation, rushed straight towards the great sage of the ancients. The great sage of the ancients' face turned solemn in the face of Xiao Chen's sword. He immediately defended himself. He had underestimated Xiao Chen before, but now it seemed that he had underestimated his opponent too much. Xiao Chen wasn't an ordinary ancestor realm expert at all. Although Xiao Chen's cultivation was only at the beginning of the ancestor realm, the great sage of the ancients felt a fatal danger from Xiao Chen's sword. It was simply ridiculous. How could a martial artist at the beginning of the ancestor realm be a threat to him? However, the great sage of the ancients didn't have the chance to think too much. Xiao Chen's attack had already arrived, bombarding the great sage of the ancient's body. The great sage of the ancients crossed his arms in front of his chest to block Xiao Chen's attack. He no longer dared to underestimate his opponent. However, Xiao Chen's sword still forced the great sage of the ancients back dozens of meters, but it still failed to injure the great sage of the ancients. The great sage of the ancients was famous for his physical body. It was said that the reason why the great sage of the ancients could become an ancestor realm expert was because of his powerful physical body. In the era of the great sage of the ancients, his physical body was the strongest among the ancestor realm experts. In terms of physical strength alone, the great sage of the ancients deserved to be called number one in that era. Therefore, the great sage of the ancients relied on his physical body the most and also his strongest defense. After successfully blocking Xiao Chen's sword, the great sage of the ancients sneered. "It seems that I've underestimated you." As he spoke, he blasted out a punch, not giving Xiao Chen the slightest chance to react. The golden fist light tore through the sky and rushed towards Xiao Chen. The speed of the fist light was so fast that it was like teleportation. It tore through the barrier of space and rushed towards Xiao Chen in the blink of an eye. Xiao Chen wanted to raise his sword to block, but there was no time. He could only throw out a punch and collide with the great sage of the ancient's fist. The two fists collided once again. This time, Xiao Chen was clearly suppressed. The great sage of the ancients' fists were famous for being far stronger than Xiao Chen's. Blood suddenly appeared on Xiao Chen's arm and his skin seemed to be torn apart by the strong pressure. One of Xiao Chen's arms instantly became dripping with blood. An extremely terrifying force swept through Xiao Chen's body. He gritted his teeth and held on. In the end, although Xiao Chen successfully blocked the great sage of the ancient's fist, one of his arms was already stained red with blood. It was an extremely violent and tyrannical force. In Xiao Chen's opinion, the only ancestor realm expert who could compete with the great sage of the ancients in terms of strength was probably Lin Yuan. The all-powerful figure from tens of thousands of years ago was indeed worthy of his reputation. Even so, Xiao Chen still had no intention of backing down. Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing had not been found yet, so naturally, Xiao Chen could not leave. "It's interesting that you can take a punch from me." The great sage of the ancients chuckled when he saw Xiao Chen take his punch. There was a look of surprise in his eyes. He thought that his punch would at least seriously injure Xiao Chen, but now it seemed that the little guy's strength was stronger than he thought. Without waiting for Xiao Chen's reply, the great sage of the ancients continued, "But how many punches can you take?" With that, the great sage of the ancients took a step forward and took the initiative to attack. His fists began to emit a strong golden light. In a flash, he appeared in front of Xiao Chen and threw out a punch. The speed of the punch was very fast. At least until now, Xiao Chen had not seen anyone whose punches could be compared with the great sage of the ancients. Please add it to your collection. Monthly vote recommend it. Chapter 2600. The fists of the great sage of the ancients were like two golden rays of light. They were extremely fast and powerful. In an instant, Xiao Chen felt as if he was shrouded in countless golden rays of light. The fists of the great sage of the ancients were like two golden rays of light. They were extremely fast and powerful. In an instant, Xiao Chen felt as if he was shrouded in countless golden rays of light. The golden rays of light rushed towards him from different directions and angles. It was as if the great sage of the ancients had launched thousands of punches at the same time. Xiao Chen had never seen such a fast fist speed before. This was also the powerful combat strength of a veteran progenitor. Not to mention, just these two fists were enough to make the great sage of the ancients proud. Xiao Chen still had a long way to go in the progenitor realm. At first, he could barely resist, but soon Xiao Chen found that his movements gradually began to be unable to keep up with the speed of the great sage of the ancients' attacks. Not only in terms of strength, but also in terms of speed, the great sage of the ancients had completely crushed him. Seeing that Xiao Chen was getting more and more exhausted, the great sage of the ancients, who was still attacking, laughed aloud. "What's wrong? You can't take it anymore? That was just a warm-up." In response, Xiao Chen gritted his teeth and did not answer. He just tried his best to resist the storm-like attacks of the great sage of the ancients. He had to admit that with the help of Lin Yun, Xiao Chen had broken through to the progenitor realm in such a short time. After breaking through to the progenitor realm, Xiao Chen was actually a little proud. He also felt that his strength was probably not weak among the progenitor realm expert. But now, after the battle with the great sage of the ancients, Xiao Chen realized how naive his thoughts were. It was true that he was not weak, but how could someone who could break through to the progenitor realm be weak? It was impossible for a weak person to reach the progenitor realm. This battle also clearly told Xiao Chen that in the progenitor realm, Xiao Chen was just a newcomer. He still had a long way to go. Just as Xiao Chen was about to completely collapse, a formation instantly enveloped Supreme Saint Huanggu. Supreme Saint Huanggu stopped what he was doing after being enveloped by the formation. The smile on his face remained unchanged as he said, "Huh? An ancestor-level array formation master." Then, he looked directly at Li Tian. At this time, Li Tian also stepped towards Xiao Chen. He ignored the great sage of the ancients and smiled at Xiao. "Of course." Xiao Chen smiled helplessly as if he had expected this result. Indeed, there's still a long way to go. After personally experiencing the gap between himself and a veteran ancestor-level expert like the great sage of the ancients, Xiao Chen's smugness had long dissipated. At the same time, he constantly reminded himself that he must not underestimate any ancestor-level expert because no ancestor-level expert could be underestimated. The great sage of the ancients, who was trapped by the array formation, did not panic in the slightest. Instead, he looked at Li Tian with interest and said, "Ancestor-level array formation master. Not bad. You're much stronger than this little guy. How about it? Are you interested in joining forces with me?" Great Sage Huanggu was interested in Li Tian and took the initiative to rope him in. After all, an ancestor-level array master was indeed rare. In response, Li Tian smiled and said, "What's in it for me?" It was definitely impossible for Li Tian to join forces with the great sage of the ancients. He said this just to get information from the great sage of the ancients. Hearing this, the great sage of the ancients said without hiding anything, "I have a way to break through to the ancestor level without using the origin energy. How about it? Join forces with me. You and I can break through to the ancestor level together and become the Lord of the world." The great sage of the ancients obviously did not know that the current great world was no longer the era of his era. It was now the era of the Cloud Palace. The great sage of the ancients said that he wanted to become the Lord of the world, which undoubtedly touched the bottom line of the Cloud Palace. What a joke! Would the Cloud Palace allow a second Lord of the world to appear in the great world? Love to read books? Have a way to break through to the ancestor level without using the origin energy, and become the Lord of the world. Hearing the great sage of the ancients' words, Li Tian's eyes flashed with coldness and the corners of his mouth turned cold. At the same time, without the great sage of the ancients noticing, Li Tian secretly contacted Lin Yun with the voice transmission talisman and told him about the situation here. Although his array formation had trapped the great sage of the ancients and Li Tian and Xiao Chen had joined forces, judging from the battle just now, Li Tian did not think that he and Xiao Chen could defeat the great sage of the ancients. Therefore, he chose to contact Lin Yun immediately. Seeing that Li Tian did not speak, the great sage of the ancients continued to smile and said, "How about it? Oh, so anxious? Can't you give me some time to think about it?" Li Tian said with a smile. Obviously, he was deliberately stalling for time. In response, the great sage of the ancients directly exposed Li Tian's thoughts. The smile on his face disappeared and he said coldly, "I don't know which force you belong to and I don't know the current situation of the great world. However, if you want to stall for time, you're too naive." After all, the great sage of the ancients had lived for so many years, and was not stupid. He could tell at a glance that Li Tian was stalling for time. Li Tian was not surprised by this and only transmitted his voice to Xiao Chen. "Xiao Chen, you and I will stall him. There's no need to win. Just wait for the palace master to come." He did not think that the two of them could defeat the great sage of the ancients. As long as they could stall for time, Xiao Chen and Li Tian should be able to do it with their strength. While Li Tian was transmitting his voice, the great sage of the ancients also directly attacked the array formation, trying to break it by force. Li Tian's array formation could trap the great sage of the ancients for a while, but it certainly could not trap him for long. Seeing this, Xiao Chen also directly attacked the great sage of the ancients. He originally wanted to rope in Li Tian, but it seemed that Li Tian had no such intention. The great sage of the ancients also chose to give up. While the three of them continued to fight fiercely, Lin Yun also successfully received Li Tian's message in the Cloud Palace. The great sage of the ancients had a secret method that could allow him to break through the ancestor realm and become a world lord without using the origin energy. His idea undoubtedly touched the bottom line of the Cloud Palace and Lin Yun. After reading Li Tian's message, a cold light flashed in Lin Yun's eyes. The great sage of the ancients was really courting death. A person who has been dead for tens of thousands of years still dares to jump out now. Lin Yun sneered and said with a murderous look. If the great sage of the ancients did not have such an idea, then perhaps Lin Yun would have just let him be and even invited him to join the Cloud Palace. After all, the great sage of the ancients' strength belonged to the top of the ancestor realm. However, since this guy was courting death, then Lin Yun naturally could not let him go. Seeing the murderous look on Lin Yun's face, Lin Yuan, who had just returned from the primordial world, asked curiously, "Big brother, what happened?" Chapter 2601. She didn't know what method the great sage of the ancients had used to successfully resurrect himself after tens of thousands of years. However, Lin Yun didn't feel too threatened. After reading Li Tian's message, Lin Yun felt that the great sage of the ancients was simply a joke. From Li Tian's message, Lin Yun already knew that the great sage of the ancients seemed to have mastered some kind of secret technique. Perhaps it could help people break through to the ancestor realm and become a world lord without using the origin power. However, would Lin Yun give the great sage of the ancients this opportunity? Or was the great sage of the ancients too arrogant? He made such a big fuss as soon as he was resurrected, as if he was afraid that others didn't know about his resurrection. Perhaps in the great sage of the ancients' opinion, with his cultivation and battle strength at the peak of the ancestor realm, no one in the macro world could do anything to him. After all, in the era of the great sage of the ancients, there was no world lord in the macro world. Naturally, the great sage of the ancients believed that the macro world was still the same. Unfortunately, tens of thousands of years had passed, which meant that the era of the great sage of the ancients had long ceased to exist. The current macro world belonged to Lin Yun and the Cloud Palace. Therefore, in Lin Yun's opinion, the great sage of the ancients was simply stupid. Regardless of whether the great sage of the ancients had really mastered such a secret technique, Lin Yun wouldn't give him the opportunity to do so. In response to Lin Yuan's inquiry, Lin Yun smiled and said, "I'm afraid you'll have to make an extra trip." In Lin Yun's opinion, the great sage of the ancients wasn't worth her effort at all. Sending Lin Yuan to deal with the great sage of the ancients was enough. As the strongest person in the Cloud Palace 9 palaces, Lin Yuan's battle strength could be said to be invincible in the ancestor realm. According to Li Tian's message, he and Xiao Chen were indeed no match for the great sage of the ancients. However, there should be no problem for Lin Yuan to deal with the great sage of the ancients. In addition, Li Tian and Xiao Qin were on the side to help. After learning about the great sage of the ancients from Lin Yuan agreed without hesitation. An idiot actually wanted to become the master of the world. This was courting death, and Lin Yuan was not going to let him succeed. Immediately, Lin Yuan bid farewell to Lin Yun and left the Cloud Palace, heading straight for the ancient Baron's continent. He had no understanding of the current situation of the outside world, nor did he know of the existence of the Cloud Palace. At this time, he was fighting fiercely with Li Tian and Xiao Qin in the ruins. The surrounding crowd was naturally unable to intervene in the intense battle between the three ancestor stage experts. Even the few half-step ancestor stage experts did not dare to approach the three of them, let alone intervene. The gap between them was simply too great. After successfully breaking through Li Tian's defense, the great sage of the ancients had a faint smile on his face. Li Tian and Xiao Qin were both ancestor stage experts, but the great sage of the ancients was extremely confident. In his opinion, Xiao Qin was just a junior who had just entered the ancestor realm. Although Xiao Qin's talent was good, his foundation was still shallow after all. He was not qualified to be compared with him. As for Li Tian, although he had been immersed in the ancestor realm for many years, the real terror of Li Tian was not his battle strength, but his identity as an array master. However, although array masters were powerful, they also had obvious drawbacks. In a head-on battle, array masters often could not exert 100% of their battle strength. If an array master wanted to unleash his true battle strength, he must have time to inscribe arrays. After all, arrays were the most terrifying means of an array master. Now, Xiao Qin was obviously not enough to restrain the great sage of the ancients. As a result, Li Tian had no time to inscribe arrays. Without arrays, Li Tian was like a tiger without its teeth. The threat he posed was greatly reduced. After living for so many years, the great sage of the ancients was no fool. He quickly understood his advantage, and focused his attack on Li Tian, not giving Li Tian the slightest opportunity to inscribe arrays. The great sage of the ancients' main target was Li Tian. Although Xiao Qin's battle strength was extraordinary, he was not a fatal threat to the great sage of the ancients. He only needed to divert some attention to guard against him. The array did not trap the great sage of the ancients for too long. After breaking free from the shackles of the array, the great sage of the ancients immediately attacked and targeted Li Tian. In this regard, Li Tian had already expected this and immediately counterattacked. However, without the time to inscribe arrays, Li Tian's battle strength was greatly reduced. However, Li Tian did not expect that he and Xiao Qin could kill the great sage of the ancients. Therefore, he had already sent a message to Lin Yun. Now, what Li Tian needed to do was to hold on until Lin Yun arrived. The great sage of the ancients threw a fierce punch. The powerful fist went straight for Li Tian. In this regard, Li Tian could only resist while looking for an opportunity to counterattack. Xiao Qin naturally would not stand by and watch. He immediately attacked and tried to restrain the great sage of the ancients from the side. In the face of Xiao Qin's attack, the great sage of the ancients sneered. Childish. With that, the great sage of the ancients changed his target in a very strange posture. The second punch that he was about to throw at Li Tian was forcibly directed at Xiao Qin. In the eyes of ordinary people, it was impossible to throw a punch in such a posture. However, the great sage of the ancients did it forcibly, and the power of his punch did not weaken in the slightest. The great sage of the ancients' pair of iron fists were indeed perfect. The sudden change made Xiao Qin's eyebrows twitch. The great sage of the ancients was indeed worthy of being called a top ancestor expert. His strength was almost completely superior to Xiao Qin's. In particular, his battle will surpassed Xiao Qin's. This was the experience he had accumulated through many years of battle. Secondly, the great sage of the ancients' control over his body had reached an incredible level. Indeed, no one who could stand at the top of an era was simple. In the face of the great sage of the ancients' sudden change of moves, Shao Chun did not think much. He instinctively raised his sword to block and protect his body. The sword realm was frantically activated to protect his body. At the same time, Li Tian also seized this opportunity to begin inscribing arrays, preparing to trap the great sage of the ancients again. However, the great sage of the ancients was already prepared for this. After throwing out a punch, he ignored Shao Qin and turned to throw another punch at Li Tian. "Do you think I'll give you the time to inscribe arrays?" As soon as he finished speaking, the great sage of the ancients blasted the array that Li Tian had yet to finish inscribing. Just as the great sage of the ancients had expected, as long as Li Tian did not succeed in inscribing arrays, the threat of Li Tian would be greatly reduced. Please add this to your collection. Monthly vote recommend this. End of chapter. Chapter 2602. Li Tian's speed of carving the formation was fast enough. Unfortunately, the great sage of the ancients didn't give him the opportunity to do so. Li Tian's speed of carving the formation was fast enough. Unfortunately, the great sage of the ancients didn't give him the opportunity to do so. The disadvantage of a formation master was completely highlighted at this time. Given the current situation, Li Tian couldn't exert his strength at all. If they had expected this situation, any of the other palace masters of the 9 palaces above the clouds would have an easier time than Li Tian. After all, Li Tian was obviously at a disadvantage compared to them. But at the same time, if Li Tian was given enough time to carve the formation steadily, then his terrifying strength would be revealed. Unfortunately, the great sage of the ancients wouldn't give Li Tian such an opportunity. Most of the time, the great sage of the ancients would rather take Shao Chen's attack head-on than give Li Tian a chance to carve the formation. In the great sage of the ancients' view, Li Tian's threat was far greater than Shao Chen's, so he couldn't give Li Tian any chance. In this regard, Shao Chen was also very helpless. He thought that his physical body was strong enough, but Shao Chen couldn't gain the slightest advantage in front of the great sage of the ancients. After breaking through to the ancestor realm, Shao Chen indeed had enough confidence to show disdain for all heroes. However, compared to a top expert like the great sage of the ancients, Shao Chen was still inferior. There was an obvious gap in their foundation, which was also Shao Chen's biggest problem at the moment. After all, the age gap between them was too big. Compared to the great sage of the ancients, the current Shao Chen couldn't be any younger. If their ages were the same, Shao Chen would undoubtedly be able to crush the great sage of the ancients. Unfortunately, Shao Chen was too young. This couldn't be helped. Although Shao Chen had spared no effort to make up for his lack of foundation through various means, the gap in time wasn't that easy to make up for. He didn't hold back, but Shao Chen knew that the gap between him and the great sage of the ancients wasn't that easy to make up for. But fortunately, Shao Chen and Li Tian's purpose was not to kill the great sage of the ancients. They only needed to delay him. They believed that Lin Yun must have reacted by now. She would either come in person or send reinforcements. In this way, Shao Chen and Li Tian only needed to stall the great saint of the ancients and not give him a chance to escape. At most, the experts of the Cloud Palace would arrive in one day. Knowing this, Shao Chen and Li Tian attacked unhurriedly. They didn't care about being suppressed by the great sage of the ancients and continued to tangle with the great sage of the ancients. The 3 of them fought fiercely, while the other cultivators of the macro worlds acted one after another to rescue the cultivators who had been trapped by the great saint of the ancients and had their flesh and soul sucked dry. These cultivators came from various forces in the large world. Of course, there were quite a few independent cultivators among them as well. When they were released one by one, their expressions all became unsightly. The bodies of these people had all become incomparably shriveled, and there was not even the slightest bit of life in them. In response, the few half-step ancestor stage experts leading the group shook their heads and said after carefully inspecting a few of them, "It's hopeless. Not to mention the destruction of their physical bodies, even their souls have been completely absorbed. If it was only the physical body that was destroyed, then by using some special means and paying a certain price, there might be a way to preserve their souls. After that, they could think of other ways to rebuild their physical bodies. But now, not only were their physical bodies destroyed, even their souls had been completely absorbed by the great sage of the ancients. It was obviously hopeless. With both the physical body and the soul dead at the same time, even a world lord couldn't save the situation." Hearing the conclusion of the few half-step progenitor experts, many of the people present looked sorrowful because many of these people were their juniors, companions, or friends. Dien Dien Book Vault. Now that they heard such words, they must be extremely sorrowful. At the same time, their hatred for the great sage of the ancients grew stronger. For the time being, there was no time to pay attention to these matters. Shao Chen and Li Tian were still fighting fiercely with the great sage of the ancients. The two of them joined forces and the great sage of the ancients couldn't do much. Although he could gain the upper hand, he couldn't easily defeat Shao Chen and Li Tian. This was the result that Shao Chen and Li Tian wanted to see. As long as they weren't defeated directly, their mission would be considered completed when the experts of the Cloud Palace arrived. The fierce battle continued and soon more than half a day passed. The battle between the three of them was still evenly matched. As time passed, the great sage of the ancients gradually realized that something was wrong. Li Tian and Shao Chen knew that they were no match for him, but they didn't have the slightest intention of retreating. Moreover, from the way they attacked, they didn't seem to have a strong killing intent towards him. It was indeed strange that they didn't want to kill him, but they also didn't want to retreat. There was only one explanation for this, and that was that Shao Chen and Li Tian were just stalling for time. After figuring this out, the great sage of the ancients' eyes turned cold. The two of them were stalling for time, waiting for the forces behind them to arrive. Although the great sage of the ancients didn't know the current situation of the macro world and was confident in his own strength, he still decided to be cautious. He didn't want to clash with the forces behind Li Tian and Shao Chen for the time being. Sensing the intentions of the two, the great sage of the ancients angrily attacked. It was obvious that he didn't want to be entangled with Shao Chen and Li Tian any longer and was ready to leave. Li Tian and Shao Chen naturally wouldn't allow the great sage of the ancients to leave. The two of them immediately tried to stop him. The great sage of the ancients smiled confidently. "Heh, do you really think that you can stop me with just the two of you?" For the time being, the great sage of the ancients couldn't do anything to them. However, if the great sage of the ancients wanted to leave, Li Tian and Shao Chen wouldn't be able to stop him. The great sage of the ancients wasn't in the mood to continue entangling with the two of them. He was determined to leave. The pressure on Li Tian and Shao Chen suddenly increased. It wasn't easy to stop the great sage of the ancients. Moreover, if they let the great sage of the ancients escape now, all their previous efforts would be wasted. In this regard, Shao Chen and Li Tian used all their strength to stop the great sage of the ancients from leaving. However, the great sage of the ancients didn't care at all. As he said, Li Tian and Shao Chen weren't enough to stop him. Seeing that the great sage of the ancients was about to break out of their encirclement, Shao Chen and Li Tian's faces darkened. Li Tian wanted to engrave a formation to trap the great sage of the ancients, but unfortunately, it was destroyed by the great sage of the ancients before it could be completed. "I'll let the two of you go this time. Next time, I'll definitely take your lives." After successfully breaking out of the encirclement of Shao Chen and Li Tian, the ancients laughed loudly and was about to leave. Unfortunately, just as the great sage of the ancients finished speaking, a sneer suddenly came from the sky. "Do you think you can leave?" Chapter 2603. After breaking through Li Tian and Xiao Chen's blockade, Supreme Saint Huanggu thought that he had successfully broken out of the encirclement. However, as the voice suddenly came from the sky, Lin Yuan's figure also appeared in front of Supreme Saint Huanggu, directly blocking his way. Seeing Lin Yuan's arrival, Li Tian heaved a sigh of relief, while Supreme Sage Huanggu frowned. Supreme Sage Huanggu felt a strong threat from Lin Yuan. However, Lin Yuan was even more dangerous than Li Tian. Not only had his cultivation reached the peak of the ancestor realm, but he was also different from Li Tian, who was an array master. Lin Yuan was an expert who was born to fight. Supreme Sage Huanggu had a clear idea of how to deal with Li Tian, which was to not give him any chance to carve a formation. However, it was obviously not going to work against Lin Yuan. Supreme Sage Huanggu's eyes flashed with a hint of fear. At the same time, he was also curious about the current situation of the Great World. Also, what was the power behind Li Tian and Xiao Chen? Supreme Sage Huanggu unconsciously regarded Lin Yuan as the person behind Li Tian and the others. After all, Lin Yuan's strength was at the top in Supreme Sage Huanggu's era. However, Supreme Sage Huanggu still underestimated the Great World. Lin Yuan was not the person behind Li Tian at all. Lin Yuan's eyes gradually surged with battle intent as he stared coldly at Supreme Sage Huanggu. He was also very interested in this expert from tens of thousands of years ago. He did not know who was stronger between them. Their cultivation levels were similar. Moreover, Lin Yuan felt a strong blood qi from Supreme Sage Huanggu's body. Needless to say, Supreme Sage Huanggu was also a cultivator with an extremely strong physical body. Lin Yuan sneered as his battle intent soared. "You won't be able to leave today." As soon as he finished speaking, Lin Yuan took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of Supreme Sage Huanggu. Then, he threw out a punch. Supreme Sage Huanggu did not dare to be careless and threw out a punch of his own. The two collided head-on, and the terrifying aftermath of the battle instantly swept across the sky. As he watched the two of them fight, Li Tian, who was standing at the side, decided to start drawing the array. However, just as Li Tian was about to act, Lin Yuan suddenly spoke up. "Don't interfere. Let me deal with him." Lin Yuan was a typical battle maniac. Now that he had encountered such a good opponent like the Supreme Sage of the Ancients, he naturally didn't want Li Tian to intervene. Upon hearing Lin Yuan's words, Li Tian smiled helplessly. However, he immediately gave up on the idea of intervening. Although Lin Yuan would definitely win if he intervened, Li Tian had no reason to refuse since Lin Yuan wanted to fight the Supreme Sage of the Ancients. Moreover, Li Tian knew why Lin Yuan was acting this way because Supreme Sage Huanggu's fighting style was very similar. First of all, both of them had strong physical bodies. At the same time, they only relied on their pair of iron fists to fight. Fist against fist, there was nothing fancy. It could be said that Lin Yuan and Supreme Sage Huanggu's fighting style was almost the same. In Lin Yuan's opinion, Supreme Sage Huanggu was undoubtedly the most suitable opponent for him. This time, neither of them had the upper hand. Supreme Sage Huanggu could not do it so easily in front of Lin Yuan. Lin Yuan's strength, especially his frontal combat strength, was definitely far superior to Xiao Chen and Li Tian. That was fun. Come again. Lin Yuan was not discouraged when he failed to gain the upper hand. Instead, he laughed heartily and looked extremely excited. Having said that, Lin Yuan launched a ferocious attack. Just like the great sage of the ancients, Lin Yuan was not only strong, but he was also extremely fast. 139 Chinese under Lin Yuan's continuous punches, the sky was already covered with fist radiance. At this moment, the fist radiance was like a flood rushing towards Supreme Sage Huanggu. Supreme Sage Huanggu did not dare to be careless in the face of Lin Yuan's attack. He felt a real threat from Lin Yan. He knew that Lin Yan's strength was not weaker than his. He had to be cautious. Without hesitation, Supreme Sage Huanggu attacked directly. The two of them immediately engaged in a fierce battle in the sky. Watching the battle between Lin Yuan and Supreme Sage Huanggu, the crowd finally understood what it meant to be punched to the flesh. There were no fancy moves. Every punch seemed ordinary, but the power was astonishing. The space had long collapsed, but to the two of them, it was as if they did not feel it at all. They did not have the slightest intention of stopping. The great sage of the ancients was the best opponent in his opinion. The great sage of the ancients was getting more and more apprehensive as the fight went on. He had thought that he had taken Lin Yuan seriously enough, but who would have thought that Lin Yuan's strength would be much stronger than he had imagined after exchanging blows with him? Supreme Sage Huanggu did not have the confidence to defeat Lin Yuan with such strength. However, Lin Yuan did not care about this now. He was already in the mood to fight. How could he care about these things? The more he fought, the braver and more excited he became. Lin Yuan's punches also became faster and stronger. Naturally, Supreme Sage Huanggu's pressure was also increasing. It was obvious that Lin Yuan was very excited. However, Great Sage Huanggu had no intention of fighting Lin Yuan to the death. Unfortunately, Lin Yuan had no intention of letting him go so easily. Both of them were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they had exchanged thousands of blows. The sky seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. As time went by, Lin Yuan began to gradually suppress Supreme Sage Huanggu. However, Lin Yuan seemed to be dissatisfied with this. He said coldly to Supreme Sage Huanggu, "Is this all the strength of the experts from tens of thousands of years ago?" It was as if he felt that Supreme Sage Huanggu was too weak for him to enjoy the fight. Supreme Sage Huanggu's face darkened and he shouted coldly, "You're courting death." Supreme Sage Huanggu was indeed not in the mood to fight Lin Yuan to the death. However, judging from the current situation, it would be difficult for him to leave today if he did not defeat Lin Yuan. With this thought, Supreme Sage Huanggu made up his mind. He stopped thinking about other things and fought Lin Yuan with all his strength. "Ancient War Body!" Supreme Sage Huanggu shouted in a low voice. A faint yellow light began to emerge from his body. The Ancient War Body was not a special physique. It was a body refining technique, similar to Xiao Chen's tempered battle body. It was also Supreme Sage Huanggu's famous consummate skill. Supreme Sage Huanggu was able to become one of the top experts in that era by relying on the terrifying Ancient War Body. At this time, Supreme Sage Huanggu's body seemed to have undergone a complete transformation. He seemed to have turned into a human-shaped Tyrannosaurus. Chapter 2604. After displaying the battle body of the ancients, the strength of the Supreme Sage of the ancients was significantly enhanced. However, this was not the end of it. As the yellow light became denser, the Supreme Sage of the ancients' body continued to expand. After displaying the battle body of the ancients, the Supreme Sage of the ancients' strength was significantly enhanced. However, this was not the end of it. As the yellow light became denser, the Supreme Sage of the ancients' body continued to expand. It was as if a layer of huge armor had formed around his body. In the blink of an eye, the Supreme Sage of the ancients had turned into a giant that was hundreds of meters tall. This was the true strength of the Supreme Sage of the ancients. Looking at the mountain-like Supreme Sage of the ancients, everyone present was dumbfounded. Lin Yuan, on the other hand, smiled excitedly. Now this is interesting. It could be seen that the current Supreme Sage of the ancients was far more powerful than before. Not only had his body expanded, but his strength and speed had also improved qualitatively. However, Lin Yuan had not shown his full strength. As the Supreme Sage of the ancients turned into a giant, Lin Yuan also returned to his original form. Among the 9 palace masters of the 9 palaces above the clouds, Lin Yuan and Lin, who were both demonic beasts. Lin Yuan's original form was a demonic ape. The demonic ape could be said to be a demonic beast that was almost extinct. However, it was a natural divine beast. Any demonic ape could tear the ancestral dragon apart as long as it grew up. This showed how powerful the demonic ape was. In the blink of an eye, Lin Yuan's body became as huge as a mountain. He was not inferior to the supreme sage of the ancients. At the same time, after returning to his original form, Lin Yuan's aura became unusually violent. His eyes were blood-red like a peerless beast. Looking at Lin Yuan, the supreme sage of the ancients' heart sank. Lin Yuan was actually a demonic ape. However, before he could think further, Lin Yuan took the initiative to launch an attack. A huge fist blasted out fiercely. This punch was enough to destroy a city. The loud sound of the air breaking resounded through the sky. Facing Lin Yuan's attack, the supreme sage of the ancients did not dare to be careless. He immediately counterattacked. The two giants collided head-on, causing the earth to shake. Seeing this, Li Tian said to Shao Chen, "Stay away." With the current destructive power of these two guys, it was better not to get close to them. Although Shao Chen and Li Tian were not injured by the aftermath of the battle, there was no need for them to intervene. It was meaningless to intervene in the battle between these two monsters. Upon hearing Li Tian's words, Shao Chen nodded noncommittally. Then, he, Li Tian, and the others retreated a distance, leaving space for Supreme Saint Huanggu and Lin Yuan. A fist collided head-on, and the strength of this fist was far from what the previous one could compare to. The strength was so great that it made people dumbfounded. Shao Chen had also witnessed with his own eyes how strong the combat prowess of a peak progenitor was. It was no exaggeration to say that the gap between him and Lin Yuan and the great saint of the ancients was still very large. They could not be compared at all. When the fist blasted out, the space directly collapsed. The terrifying void storm raged wildly. The void storm was like countless sharp blades, but it had no effect in front of Lin Yuan and the supreme sage of the ancients. Both of them ignored the void storm. At the same time, as the fist landed, Lin Yuan did not give the supreme sage of the ancients any chance to catch his breath. He immediately leaped up and engaged in a fierce battle with the supreme sage of the ancients. Looking at the fierce battle between the two, Li Tian did not look too worried. He was well aware of Lin Yuan's strength. No matter how strong the supreme sage of the ancients was, he could at most be evenly matched with Lin Yuan. It was impossible for him to pose a threat to Lin Yuan. The number one expert of the 9 palaces above the clouds was not a title for nothing. Lin Yuan's combat strength was definitely at the top of the progenitor realm. Gong Nantian of the Immortal Palace, Missouri He of the Demon Abyss, Xie Qingtian of the Heretical Sect. These were all famous experts, but without exception they were all afraid of Lin Yuan. Moreover, Mo He and Xie Qingtian had suffered a great loss in the hands of Lin Yuan. Therefore, Li Tian was not worried about Lin Yuan. The only thing Li Tian needed to do now was to prevent the supreme sage of the ancients from escaping. As long as he did not give the supreme sage of the ancients a chance to escape, Lin Yuan could kill him. The two's fighting styles were indeed the same. There was nothing fancy about it. It was the most direct and primitive way of fighting, relying on their pair of iron fists. Their huge bodies did not affect their speed. On the contrary, their speed was much faster than before. The sky was filled with fist shadows, making it impossible for people to see the tricks of their fists. Such a battle left many experts of the great world stunned. Many of them had never seen a battle of this level in their lives. In their eyes, Lin Yuan and the supreme sage of the ancients were like two celestial emperors fighting fiercely. The sky was falling apart because of the battle, and the earth was cracking inch by inch. This was a battle between real experts. It was not an exaggeration to say that the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. The battle had reached its climax. Lin Yuan and the supreme sage of the ancients were completely immersed in the battle. They had no intention of paying attention to what was happening in the outside world. Such a breathtaking battle made everyone unable to take their eyes off it. At the same time, Lin Yun was sitting with Lu Bingning and chatting. As Lin Yun's wife, Lu Bingning was naturally deeply trusted by Lin Yun. She also knew about the supreme sage of the ancients. At this time, while making tea for Lin Yun, Lu Bingning asked faintly, "Is it okay to let Lin Yuan go alone? Don't you need Lin Hu and the others to support him?" Naturally, she had heard of the supreme sage of the ancients. She also knew that the supreme sage of the ancients was an expert who had been famous for many years. His cultivation was definitely at the peak of the ancestor realm. It could be said that he was almost on par with Lin Yuan. Therefore, Lu Bingning was still worried that Lin Yuan would struggle to take down the supreme sage of the ancients by himself. However, when she heard this, Lin Yun smiled slightly and said confidently, "Times have changed. It is no longer the era of the supreme sage of the ancients. Don't worry, Lin Yuan alone is enough. Besides, isn't there Li Tian? With Li Tian around, the supreme sage of the ancients won't be able to escape." Lin Yun had never taken the supreme sage of the ancients seriously. This was also the reason why Lin Yun didn't take action personally. Although the supreme sage of the ancients might have mastered some kind of secret technique that could allow him to break through the ancestor realm and become the lord of the world, Lin Yun felt that these things were just evil method. Lin Yun didn't care and wasn't interested in these things. She was satisfied as long as she killed the supreme sage of the ancients. Looking at Lin Yun's confident face, Lu Bingning smiled slightly and said, "You are very confident. Of course. The current great world belongs to me, Lin Yun. The era of the supreme sage of the ancients has long passed." In response, Lin Yun said with a smile, "Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 2605. Lin Yun was not worried about the great saint of the ancients at all. She did not think that the great saint of the ancients could pose any threat to her. This was the confidence of the Cloud Palace Master. Hearing this, Lu Bingning smiled slightly and did not say anything else. She directly handed a cup of tea to Lin Yun. Lin Yun was not worried about the great saint of the ancients at all. She did not think that the great saint of the ancients could pose any threat to her. This was the confidence of the Cloud Palace Master. Hearing this, Lu Bingning smiled slightly and did not say anything else. She directly handed a cup of tea to Lin Yun. Lin Yun was now the only king of the macro world. No one could challenge Her Majesty. As for the great saint of the ancients, who had been dead for tens of thousands of years, it would be strange if he could pose a threat to Lin Yun with a casual move. It also showed that Lin Yun was not qualified to be the master of the Cloud Palace. Lin Yun did not think much about the outcome of the matter. In her opinion, it was already predestined. The great saint of the ancients could not achieve anything. Lin Yun was full of confidence. In the ruins, the fierce battle between Lin Yuan and the great saint of the ancients continued. Both of them did not hold back at all. However, as time passed, the great saint of the ancients gradually fell into a disadvantage. The more he fought, the more shocked he became. The great saint of the ancients had never met anyone whose physical body was comparable to Lin Yuan's. Originally, the great saint of the ancients was full of confidence in his physical body. However, after meeting Lin Yuan, the great saint of the ancients realized that Lin Yuan was superior to him in terms of physical body. The great saint of the ancients who was famous for his physical body lost to another person in terms of physical body. The great saint of the ancients found it hard to accept. At the same time, he began to wonder what was going on in the macro world. His heart was heavy. On the other hand, Lin Yuan was completely different. The more he fought, the more excited he became. He did not care about the changes in the great saint of the ancients at all. His attacks were like tidal waves that rushed towards the great saint of the ancients. He did not give the great saint of the ancients any chance to breathe. At this point, Supreme Sage Huanggu was already thinking of retreating. He didn't want to continue fighting with Lin Yuan. After paying such a huge price, the great sage of the ancients finally came back to life. It was all for the position of the Lord of the world, not to fight to the death with Lin Yuan. And looking at the current situation, it was obviously not good for the great sage of the ancients to continue fighting. Thinking of retreating, Supreme Sage Huanggu began to look for an opportunity to escape. However, he failed to hide his thoughts from Lin Yuan and Li Tian. Before Supreme Sage Huanggu could escape, Li Tian had already set up a formation that enveloped both Supreme Sage Huanggu and Lin Yuan. Supreme Sage Huanggu's face darkened when he realized that he was enveloped by a formation. Lin Yuan shouted coldly, "Don't you think you're too naive to think that you can leave now?" Li Tian had not made a move. On one hand, it was because of Lin Yuan's request. On the other hand, it was to prevent the great saint of the ancients from escaping. After all, with Supreme Sage Huanggu's strength, if he wanted to escape, Lin Yuan alone would not be able to stop him. However, it was completely different with Li Tian by his side. Without the disturbance from the outside world, Li Tian had enough time to set up the formation. He might not be able to kill the great saint of the ancients with the formation, but at least it would not be a problem to trap him. From the beginning, he did not give the great saint of the ancients any chance to escape. Hearing Lin Yuan's words, Supreme Sage Huanggu's face turned completely gloomy. At the same time, for the first time, Supreme Sage Huanggu felt the threat of death. There was no way to escape. If he continued to fight to the death, the situation would only become worse for him. There was no doubt about it. As for Lin Yuan, he did not care so much. Lin Yun's order was to kill the great saint of the ancients. Lin Yuan naturally would not show any mercy. His attacks did not decrease, but instead became even more ferocious. He attacked the great saint of the ancients without any explanation. Must-read room. Supreme Sage Huanggu found it increasingly difficult to resist Lin Yuan's attack. Cracks began to appear on the giant body formed by the golden light. Apparently, it was showing signs of collapse. "It seems that your war body of the ancients can't hold on any longer." Seeing the cracks spreading, Lin Yuan threw a punch and sneered. Hearing Lin Yuan's words, the great saint of the ancients did not reply. His face was cold. He naturally felt that his war body of the ancients was on the verge of collapse, but there was nothing he could do. There was no way he could escape. In terms of strength, he was not as strong as Lin Yuan. If it was a one-on-one battle, the great saint of the ancients would not be worried. If he could not defeat Lin Yuan, he could run away. But now there was the formation Master Li Tian on the side. Escaping had become impossible. Since he could not escape, he could only bite the bullet and fight Lin Yuan fiercely. Such a fierce battle would only become more and more strenuous as time passed. The originally small gap in strength between the two sides would continue to widen as time passed. There was not much time for the great saint of the ancients to think of a countermeasure. Lin Yuan threw a punch and collided with the great saint of the ancients. Along with the collision, one of the great saint of the ancients' arms was directly blown off by Lin Yuan. The battle body of the ancients was broken by Lin Yuan right there and then. Lin Yuan did not stop at all after landing a hit and threw another punch. This time, the Supreme Saint of the Ancients found it even more difficult to resist and had no choice but to take Lin Yuan's punch head-on. As a result, the war body of the Ancients, which was already on the verge of collapse, was directly blasted apart. The originally huge body also collapsed inch by inch in an instant. With the war body of the Ancients destroyed, the great Saint of the Ancients' body appeared in front of everyone again. However, at this moment, the great Saint of the Ancients had blood on the corner of his mouth, and his breath was extremely weak. It was obvious that he was seriously injured. The great Saint of the Ancients was particularly confident in his strength before, but who would have thought that he would be defeated just like that? Moreover, He was defeated by Lin Yuan in a direct confrontation. The great saint of the ancients was shocked that his war body of the ancients had been forcibly shattered by Lin Yuan. However, before he could react, Lin Yuan's fist had already descended from the sky and pressed down on the great saint of the ancients with the force of a mountain. The great saint of the ancients felt that the sky had turned dark. He looked up and saw a huge fist descending from the sky and slamming down on him. Without the war body of the ancients, the great saint of the ancients did not think that he could withstand Lin Yuan's punch. A look of fear appeared in his eyes unconsciously. The great saint of the ancients could not help but say, "Stop, I can teach you a secret technique that will allow you to break through the ancestor realm and become the lord of the world." The great saint of the ancients was indeed afraid in the face of death. He was even willing to use a secret technique to escape from Lin Yuan. In his opinion, no one would be able to resist the temptation of breaking through to the ancestor realm. Unfortunately, it was useless against Lin Yuan because only one world lord of the macro world was enough, and that person was Lin Yun. Therefore, Lin Yuan did not hesitate in the face of the great saint of the ancients begging for mercy. His iron fist landed heavily on the great saint of the ancients' body. Immediately, the great saint of the ancients was blasted down from the sky and his physical body was shattered. Chapter 2606. Lin Yuan didn't care about what the great sage of the ancients said. Regardless of whether Lin Yuan was willing to break through to the progenitor realm, he would never betray Lin Yun. Lin Yuan didn't care about what the great sage of the ancients said. Regardless of whether Lin Yuan was willing to break through to the progenitor realm, he would never betray Lin Yun. If the price of breaking through to the progenitor realm was to betray Lin Yun, Lin Yuan wouldn't even consider it. Their relationship was as deep as Xiao Chen's, Xian Yuanling's, and Long Qing's. Lin Yuan's punch directly shattered the great sage of the ancients' body. Without the ancients' war body, the great sage of the ancients couldn't withstand Lin Yuan's all-out punch. Lin Yuan didn't hold back at all in this punch. He even maintained his original state. Such a powerful punch, coupled with the great sage of the ancients' current state, was naturally difficult to block. The great sage of the ancients' body was directly shattered. However, the great sage of the ancients was still an expert at the peak of the progenitor realm. Even if he lost his body, he wouldn't be disappointed. At least his spirit was still intact. Smoke and dust rose as the great sage of the ancient spirit was destroyed once again. A cold light flashed in the eyes of the great sage of the ancient spirit, but he didn't dare to stay for long. He planned to take advantage of the chaos to escape. As for the spirit of the ancients, he could just reforge a new body in the future. Unfortunately, the idea was beautiful, but the reality was often cruel. Before the great sage of the ancients could escape, Lin Yuan had already grabbed his spirit. The great sage of the ancients panicked when he was caught by Lin Yuan. Unfortunately, he couldn't break free from Lin Yuan's control. "Do you think I'll give you a chance to escape?" Lin Yuan said coldly as he looked at the great sage of the ancients who was constantly struggling in his hand. As soon as he finished speaking, Lin Yuan exerted force and crushed the great sage of the ancients' spirit. The great sage of the ancients' body and spirit were destroyed. The great sage of the ancients could be said to have completely disappeared from the world. After the battle ended, everyone unconsciously heaved a sigh of relief. Xiao Chun immediately went to the dried corpses and began to search for traces of Xian Yuanling and Long Qing. There was an unconcealable look of worry on his face. If something really happened to Xian Yuanling and Long Qing, to be honest, Xiao Chun did not know what he would do. Xiao Chun kept praying in his heart that everything was fine. As he searched, the expression on his face became more and more anxious. He did not find Xian Yuanling and Long Qing. This was good news, but it also made Xiao Chun even more worried. Until Xiao Chun heard Long Qing's voice behind him. "Little brother, Xiao Chen suddenly turned his head and saw Xian Yuanling and Long Qing in the crowd. The two of them and a few other people had successfully escaped the disaster and hid in the secret realm. It was not until the battle ended that everyone rushed over. Seeing that Xian Yuanling and Long Qing were safe and sound, Xiao Chen was stunned for a moment. Then, he was overjoyed. In a flash, he appeared in front of the two of them and hugged them tightly without any explanation. He said sincerely, "It's good that you're fine." Xiao Chen indeed felt like he had survived a disaster. Previously, he thought that something had happened to Xian Yuanling and Long Qing, but in the end, the two of them were fine. Looking at Xiao Chen's worried look, Xian Yuanling and Long Qing smiled slightly. They were lucky. Otherwise, they would have been dead by now. After hugging each other for a moment, Long Qing looked at Xiao Chen's worried look and could not help but tease him. "Little brother, are you that worried about us? At least give us some confidence." Long Qing's teasing also made Xiao Chen's mood unconsciously better. The main thing was that the two of them were fine. This made Xiao Chen completely relieved. The biggest stone in his heart had been lifted. However, Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, Li Chun, Dan Xian and the others were not so lucky. Previously, Xiao Chen had already noticed them among the many mummies. However, at that time, Xiao Chen was worried about Xian Yuanling and Long Qing, so he did not pay much attention to them. After all, compared to Xian Yuanling and Long Qing, Dao Ju and the others were obviously inferior in Xiao Chen's heart. Now that Xian Yuanling and Long Qing were fine, Xiao Chen's gaze once again fell on Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao and the others. At the same time, Lin Yuan and Li Tian also came to Xiao Chen's side. Along the way, the experts greeted them one after another, and the two of them simply nodded in response. At this moment, looking at Dao Ju and the others in front of Xiao Chen, Li Tian frowned slightly. After personally inspecting them, he shook his head helplessly and said, "Their flesh and soul have been sucked dry." Sigh, although he did not say it explicitly, it was not difficult to understand from Li Tian's words that it was probably hopeless. After all, even their spiritual power was gone, so it was impossible to save them. Upon hearing his words, Xiao Chen was still unwilling to give up. "Palace Master, is there no way to save them?" Li Tian and the others were helpless, but Lin Yun was the ruler of the world, so Xiao Chen still held on to a trace of hope. Besides, Xiao Chen didn't wish for Dao Ju and the others to perish just like that. If there was a way to save Xiao Chen, he would definitely spare no effort to think of a way. But after hearing Xiao Chen's words, Li Tian shook his head and said, "It's useless. If their souls hadn't dissipated, perhaps there would still be a way." But now Li Tian didn't finish his sentence, but it was obvious that even if the Cloud Palace and Lin Yun were to take action, they wouldn't be able to defy the heavens. After hearing Li Tian's conclusion, Xiao Chen couldn't help but feel a little upset. Although Xian Yuanling and Long Qing were fine, Dao Ju and the others couldn't be saved. Xiao Chen naturally didn't feel good about it. It was especially so for Xiao Xiao, who was close to Xiao Chen and could be considered as his senior sister. But now, he couldn't save her at all. Everyone was in the same situation. Their flesh, blood, and spiritual power were all absorbed by the great sage of the ancients. Even the gods couldn't save them. Upon hearing Li Tian and Xiao Chen's words, the powerful beings in the surroundings sulked. Many of them were their juniors and friends. Now that they couldn't be saved, it was only natural that they were heartbroken. But while everyone was inwardly grieving, pillars of blood descended from the sky all of a sudden. The flesh power that was absorbed by the great sage of the ancients was once again infused into their bodies. Everyone was stunned by this sudden change. Then, Li Tian and Lin Yuan revealed looks of joy. Perhaps this is the flesh and blood of the great sage of the ancients returning to his body after his death, Li Tian said with a smile. After the great sage of the ancients died, the flesh power that was absorbed by him returned to everyone's bodies. This was obviously a good thing. Even Lin Yuan said indifferently, seizing the flesh and blood of others in order to revive oneself. This kind of crooked path is ultimately not the right path. Now that he's dead, it can be considered as returning to his rightful owner. Lin Yuan obviously looked down on the great sage of the ancients' method. It might sound heaven-defying, but in fact, the price to pay for it was definitely not low. Lin Yuan wasn't interested in such methods. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend me. Chapter 2607. As the pillars of blood fell from the sky, the power of flesh and blood continuously entered everyone's bodies. Soon, the people who had turned into dried corpses quickly recovered. The power of flesh and blood had been forcibly seized by the great sage of the ancients. Now that it had returned to everyone's bodies, it could be considered as returning to its rightful owner. Of course, this was also because the great sage of the ancients had not completely refined and integrated it. To put it bluntly, when the great sage of the ancients absorbed everyone's flesh and blood, it was more like a robbery. However, the flesh and blood did not completely fuse with his body. Now that the great sage of the ancients was killed, the flesh and blood naturally returned to their respective owners. Moreover, as the power of flesh and blood continued to flow into everyone's bodies, the power of soul also followed. Originally, they were still thinking about how to save these people, but now it seemed that there was no need to worry. Who would have thought that the great sage of the ancients' secret technique would have such an obvious drawback? That's all. There's nothing to worry about. Looking at the return of the power of flesh and soul, Li Tian said with a smile. Xiao Chen was also completely relieved. Looking at Dao Ju, and Xiao Zhao's bodies returning to normal, Xiao Chen was also completely relieved. Looking at the current situation, it would not take long for them to wake up. This was indeed great news. After all, everyone was still worried before, but now all the problems were solved. Sure enough, as the pillars of blood in the sky disappeared one after another, Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others woke up again. They looked around blankly and saw that Xiao Chen was also present. Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others looked puzzled. Brother Xiao Chen, why are you here? None of them seemed to remember much about what had happened before. Xiao Chen only briefly explained what had happened, and it was only after that that everyone gradually began to recall what had happened. Originally, they entered the ruins to see if they could obtain the inheritance of the great sage of the ancients or some other opportunities. Who would have thought that all this was a trap set by the great sage of the ancients? Fortunately, Xiao Chen and the others had arrived in time. Otherwise, they would have been in real danger. Thinking of this, everyone could not help but feel a lingering fear. Fortunately, it was a close call in the end. This allowed everyone to heave a sigh of relief. Seeing that everyone was fine, they searched around the ruins again. Since they didn't find anything valuable, they didn't stay any longer and left the ruins. Outside the ruins, Xiao Chen looked at Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others and asked, I plan to return to the Cloud Palace. What do you think? Do you want to continue training, or do you want to come with me? Since everyone had come together, it was naturally impossible to leave them behind. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling did not say much. They drank until late at night before everyone dispersed. Early the next morning, Xiao Chen had just started cultivating when he was summoned by Lin Yun. He did not know why Lin Yun had summoned him, but Xiao Chen still went to Lin Yun's residence as he was told. Upon seeing Xiao Chen, Lin Yun said with a smile, I heard that you came back yesterday, so I sent someone to invite you over today. After spending some time together, Lin Yun and Xiao Chen had become familiar with each other. Moreover, Lin Yun had obviously always treated Xiao Chen as an equal. Perhaps in Lin Yun's opinion, Xiao Chen would definitely become the world master of the Great Thousand World in the future. Therefore, it was only a matter of time, and there was no need to be so calculative. Upon hearing Lin Yun's words, Xiao Chen smiled and nodded. Then, he sat down opposite Lin Yun and personally made a pot of tea for Xiao Chen. Lin Yun said faintly, "Have you heard of the Origin World?" Origin World? Xiao Chen shook his head when he heard that. He had never heard of the primordial world and knew nothing about it. Lin Yun wasn't surprised when he heard that and continued to speak. The Origin World is already a secret of the universe. I didn't tell you before because your cultivation was still lacking. However, Xiao Chen, now that you've broken through to the ancestor realm, I can tell you some things in advance so that you can be prepared. Chapter 2608. Lin Yun had asked Xiao Chen to come today to tell him about the Origin World. The reason why she hadn't told him before was that Xiao Chen's cultivation base was too weak at that time. Without reaching the ancestor realm, he wasn't qualified to come in contact with the Origin World. He wasn't even qualified to cross the threshold of the Origin World. Lin Yun had asked Xiao Chen to come today to tell him about the Origin World. The reason why she hadn't told him before was that Xiao Chen's cultivation base was too weak at that time. Without reaching the ancestor realm, he wasn't qualified to come in contact with the Origin World. He wasn't even qualified to cross the threshold of the Origin World. Now, Xiao Chen had successfully broken through to the ancestor realm. Although he had just entered the ancestor realm, he already had the minimum qualification. In addition, Xiao Chen would become the world master of the Great Thousand World in the future. Therefore, it wouldn't be bad for Xiao Chen to learn about the Origin World in advance. He had never heard of the Origin World and didn't know anything about it. However, looking at Lin Yun's serious face, Xiao Chen gathered his thoughts and listened attentively. Seeing Xiao Chen's serious expression, Lin Yun nodded slightly and said, "The Origin World can be said to be the origin of thousands of universes. Xiao Chen, have you ever thought about how these universes were formed? The Great Thousand World, the Great World, the Great Demon World, and the Hongmeng World." Xiao Chen had never thought about how these universes were formed. Seeing Xiao Chen shake his head, Lin Yun continued slowly. Before the universes were formed, there was nothing in the world. There was no life, no continents, and not even an endless starry sky. During that period, the only place that was born was the Origin World. The Origin World is the origin of all universes and life. It gave birth to thousands of universes. Hearing Lin Yun's words, Xiao Chen was shocked. The origin of thousands of universes. Just this fact alone was enough to shock people. However, that wasn't the most important thing. The true reason why the Origin World had always stood above the myriad of universes was because of the old monsters in the Origin World. As the first place where life was born, the old monsters in the Origin World were called the Ancestors. They were the first batch of creatures in this universe. They weren't humans, demons, or beasts. They were self-contained life forms. When they were born, they had advantages that no one else could compare with. It could be said that they were the true darlings of heaven and earth. In other words, they were the true heirs of heaven and earth. As for the creatures in the universe, to put it bluntly, they were all their descendants. Whether it was the human race, the demon race, the celestial race, the god race, the beast race, or other races, they were all their descendants. The Origin Realm had created thousands of universes, and the Ancestors had created billions of creatures. Therefore, the Origin Realm had always had a transcendent status among the thousands of universes. Since ancient times, no matter how strong a universe was or how many experts it had never been able to escape the control of the Origin Realm and the Ancestors. Although the Origin Realm rarely interfered with the affairs of the thousands of universes and many universes hadn't even come in contact with the Origin Realm, the Origin Realm had always controlled everything in a place you couldn't see. This was very frightening. In a place where you couldn't see, a pair of invisible hands had been covering you from beginning to end. Yet, you didn't know about it at all and were enjoying yourself. Moreover, the ancestors of the origin realm had set up a threshold. It was the threshold to come in contact with the origin realm. Any universe that wanted to come in contact with the origin realm had to meet a condition. It had to have a world lord. Only a universe that had a world lord could come in contact with the origin realm. This was also why no one in the Great Thousand World knew about the existence of the origin realm. To put it bluntly, the Great Thousand World wasn't qualified to meet the conditions set by the ancestors. The benefactors controlled everything. However, the origin realm wasn't without factions. There were two major forces in the entire origin realm. One was the Righteous Path Alliance and the other was the Dark Era. These two factions had been opposing each other since the beginning. If one wanted to trace back to the origin, it could be traced back to the birth of all creatures. The benefactors of the Righteous Path Alliance had created the Human Clan, the Heavenly Clan, and the God Clan. They believed that humans were born good and all creatures should be kind and harmonious. On the other hand, the ancestors of the Dark Era had created the Demon Clan, the Beast Clan, the Ghost Clan, and so on. They believed that the strong were respected and they would do anything to achieve their goals. Therefore, the two factions had been opposing each other since the beginning. It was because of the different ideologies of the ancestors. There was no room for reconciliation. Because of this, the alliance of the Righteous Path and the Dark Epoch had always been fighting both openly and covertly. Neither side was willing to back down. As a result, the universe was basically divided into two camps. For example, the Great World and the Hong Meng World belonged to the Righteous Path Alliance because the Human Clan was the master of these two universes. On the other hand, universes like the Great Devil World belonged to the Dark Era because the master of their world was the Demon Clan. The two factions had been opposing each other since birth. This was something that couldn't be changed. Both sides wanted to implement their own ideologies completely. Because of this, the Great Thousand World was now in the eye of the storm. The Righteous Path Alliance wanted the Human Clan and the God Clan to become the world master of the Great Thousand World. Obviously, the Dark Era wasn't willing to see such an outcome. Therefore, the Righteous Path Alliance and the ancestors of the Dark Era started to fight around the Great Thousand World. Whether it was the Great World, the Hong Meng World, the Great Devil World, or Lin Yun, Mu Lingxian, or Mo Lin, they were just chess pieces in the battle between the ancestors. Of course, Shao Chun was also a chess piece. However, he was a smaller chess piece. Of course, given the current situation of the Great Thousand World, the Righteous Path Alliance definitely had a certain advantage. This was because Shao Chun was the most likely person to become the world master of the Great Thousand World. Therefore, the ancestors of the Righteous Path Alliance asked Lin Yun and Mu Lingxian to do everything possible to help Shao Chun so that Shao Chun could truly become the world master of the Great Thousand World. However, the Dark Era wouldn't sit back and do nothing. They would definitely think of a way to solve the current situation. They might support someone to compete with Shao Chun, or they might use other means. It was more likely that they would rather die than live in dishonor. To put it bluntly, if the Dark Era couldn't find a way to solve the situation in the end, they might not hesitate to destroy the entire Great Thousand World. They wouldn't let the Righteous Path Alliance have their way. Therefore, the situation of Shao Chun and the Great Thousand World would become more and more dangerous in the future. To put it bluntly, Lin Yun's role in the matter had risen to the level of the origin world. This was because the ancestors weren't people that Lin Yun could compete with. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 2609. It could be said that the progenitors of the children of the heavens and earth possessed an advantage that ordinary people could not hope to reach since they were born. It could be said that they did not need to cultivate to become peerless experts of the world. Moreover, their compatibility with the world's spiritual energy had reached a perfect level. Moreover, every single one of these progenitors had lived for an unknown number of years. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they lived as long as the heavens. Therefore, even though Lin Yun was the master of the world, there was still a huge gap between her and these progenitors. To put it bluntly, such a gap was more like a gap in the level of life. It was destined from birth. Xiao Chen fell silent after Lin Yun finished explaining the origin world. The origin of the world, the ancestor of all life. Every word Lin Yun said brought great shock to Xiao Chen. Of course, Lin Yun did not say all this simply to introduce the origin world to Xiao Chen. Instead, she wanted to tell Xiao Chen that what he needed to pay attention to next was the time when the old fellows of the origin world would definitely not give up so easily, especially the Dark Age. According to Lin Yun's guess, it was impossible for the other universes to interfere with the matters of the Great Thousand World. This was because the Demon Abyss and Evil Sect had returned in defeat after Immortal Palace and Cloud Palace had interfered. In this way, the Dark Age should have given up on this path and might instead support some people to compete with Xiao Chen for the position of Master of the World. Once the matter developed to this point, the Cloud Palace and Immortal Palace would not be able to interfere directly. Therefore, Lin Yun had strongly hoped that Xiao Chen would break through to the progenitor realm as soon as possible. After all, only then would Xiao Chen have the ability to compete with those people for the position of Master of the World. While Lin Yun explained the origin world to Xiao Chen, the progenitors of the Righteous Path Alliance had gathered in the origin world. Their figures were still hazy and illusory, so it was impossible to see their appearances clearly. They sat together in a circle. When they were still alive, a figure shrouded in black mist slowly appeared. This person came from the Dark Age. He was the progenitor of the Dark Age. The progenitors of the two factions naturally did not meet to reminisce about the past. Although they were progenitors, the children of the heavens and earth, they basically did not have much contact due to their different ideals. Since they were able to sit together now, they were clearly discussing some matters. This matter was similar to what Lin Yun had guessed. It was related to the Great Thousand World. Due to the Dark Age, the progenitors of the Dark Age had given up on the outside to interfere with the Great Thousand Worlds and began to cultivate Xiao Chens to compete with them. We have not met for several tens of thousands years, the primogenitor of the Dark Era said in a hoarse voice as soon as he appeared. They were all in the origin world, but they hadn't met for tens of thousands of years. In response, the progenitors of the Righteous Path Alliance replied faintly. We have not met for several tens of thousands of years, but what can we do? The progenitor of the Dark Age did not seem to be angry at the progenitors of the Righteous Path Alliance. It was as though he did not care at all. His face could not be seen clearly. Under the concealment of the black mist, no one knew what expression the progenitor of the Dark Age had. However, it was only a short silence before the progenitor of the Dark Age spoke. There has to be an end to the Great Thousand Worlds, right? There has to be an end, but the Dark Age seems to have failed. It can't be considered a failure. However, it's not the time yet. I believe the Righteous Path Alliance does not want to start a war at this time. Since that's the case, why don't we both take a step back and let the Great Thousand Worlds deal with the Great Thousand Worlds themselves? The Great Thousand Worlds would not interfere, and the Great Thousand Worlds would deal with the Great Thousand Worlds themselves. In the end, whoever could become the World Lord of the Great Thousand Worlds would have to rely on their own abilities. Upon hearing the progenitor of the Dark Age's words, the progenitors of the Righteous Path Alliance fell silent. Although they had expected this, it was still difficult for them to accept it. Seeing that the progenitors of the Righteous Path Alliance were silent, the progenitor of the Dark Age sneered. Is there still a need to hesitate? This is the best choice. Indeed, there was no need to hesitate. After all, the Righteous Path Alliance did not have a better choice in the current situation. It was even more impossible for them to start a war with the Dark Age. When the primogenitor of the Dark Era finished speaking, the primogenitors of the Alliance of the Orthodox sects did not hesitate any longer. They nodded and replied, "Let's do it this way. We'll rely on our own abilities, but only the people of the Great Thousand World can settle it." Of course, the progenitor of the Dark Age nodded in agreement. The internal matters of the Great Thousand Worlds would be settled by the Great Thousand Worlds themselves. This was the result of both sides coming to a compromise. After all, if the other universes continued to interfere, that was not the result that the progenitors wanted to see. Moreover, if this continued, more universes would be involved. Now there were only the Cloud Palace, Immortal Palace, Demon Abyss, and Evil Sect. If this continued, it would be difficult to control how many universes would be involved. After reaching a consensus, the progenitor of the Dark Age left. Although the expressions of the progenitors of the Righteous Path Alliance could not be seen clearly, it was likely that they did not look too good. However, this was only a matter of one universe. It was not enough for them to pay too much attention to it. Although the Great Thousand Worlds had great potential, at the level of the progenitors, the ownership of one universe could no longer affect the overall situation. However, both sides were in a state of competition. No one wanted to hand over a universe like the Great Thousand Worlds, which had complete laws of heaven and earth, to someone else. After a long while, one of the progenitors said, "Inform Lin Yun to make preparations to sue Xiaochen." Since the Great Thousand Worlds would be settled by themselves, the Righteous Path Alliance naturally chose Xiaochen without hesitation. After all, Xiaochen was from the human race. Moreover, he was currently the most promising person to become the world master of the Great Thousand Worlds. Therefore, the Righteous Path Alliance could only choose Xiaochen. As for who the Dark Age Alliance would choose in the end, that was not something that they should consider. In any case, whether Xiaochen could succeed or not was directly related to the ownership of the Great Thousand World. If Xiaochen could successfully become the world master of the Great Thousand Worlds, then the Great Thousand Worlds would belong to the Righteous Path Alliance. If not, they would probably have to join the Dark Age Alliance. After hearing the progenitor's words, the others did not have any objections. Since both sides had reached a compromise and there was a result, this was the only way. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. The current Xie Tian not only had peak innate talent, his battle strength was no different from a true ancestor realm expert. With the methods of the Dark Age primogenitor, it was not strange for them to be able to do this. The reason why the Dark Age primogenitor had revived Xie Tian was self-evident. It was to fight for the position of the world master of the Great Thousand World. The Righteous Path Alliance had Xiaochen, who had the advantage, so the Dark Age primogenitor could only choose another path and choose Xie Tian. Moreover, they had specially made a move to increase Xie Tian's strength in all aspects, because only like this could Xie Tian compete with Xiaochen, otherwise there was no way to compete. Seeing Xie Tian respectfully bow in front of them, one of the primogenitors said in a soft voice, "Your son, the evil spirits, is already dead. In the great demon world, he died at the hands of Xiaochen." Hearing this, Xie Tian's eyes filled with strong killing intent and grief. The evil spirits had died. This was something Xie Tian had never expected, and it was at the hands of Xiaochen. Feeling Xie Tian's killing intent and grief, the Dark Age primogenitor paused for a bit before continuing. "Do you hate Xiaochen? Everything you had was taken by him. The evil god palace was like this, and your son, the evil spirits, were also like this. Go to the Great Thousand World and take back everything that belongs to you. Take the position of World Master, and this old man will personally make a move to revive the evil spirits, allowing you and your son to reunite." Chapter 26:11. Perhaps no one would have thought that the ancestors of the Dark Era would choose Xietian. Xietian, who should have been dead, had been revived, and his strength could not be compared to before. In order to let Xietian have the strength to fight against Shao Chen, the ancestors of the Dark Era had put in quite a bit of effort. They had even made a promise to help Xietian revive his son. However, Xietian did not know that it was impossible for the evil spirits to be revived because his physical body and divine soul had been destroyed by Shao Chen. There was not a trace of him left, not even a trace of his soul. Even the ancestors of the Dark Era could not revive the evil spirit. Xietian revealed an excited look when he heard the ancestors' words. He immediately bowed respectfully and said, "Many thanks, ancestor." Xietian naturally did not know much about the origin world. When he was in the Great Thousand World, he was only left with a trace of his soul. He had been brought here by the ancestors of the Dark Era and had been in the blood pool. He did not know much about the outside world, and the ancestors of the Dark Era did not say much to him. The only thing they said was to let Xietian fight for the position of World Master of the Great Thousand World. Other than that, Xietian knew nothing. Seeing Xietian's excited appearance, the ancestor of the Dark Era waved his hand and said in a soft voice, "Go. Take the position of World Master of the Great Thousand World, and this old man will revive your son, the evil spirit." After saying this, the ancestor of the Dark Era waved his hand, and Xietian instantly disappeared from the main hall. He directly sent Xietian out of the origin world. With Xietian's current strength, he was not qualified to come into contact with the origin world. In the eyes of the ancestors of the Dark Era, Xietian was at most a chess piece to fight for the Great Thousand World with the Righteous Alliance. Shao Chen did not know about Xietian's revival at all. After Lin Yun received the message from the ancestors of the Righteous Alliance, she told Shao Chen to return to the Great Thousand World immediately. Since both sides had come to a compromise and reached an agreement, the Dark Era was likely to make a move. Shao Chen would definitely be in the Great Thousand World at this time. Moreover, since things had developed to this point, whether it was Lin Yun or Mu Lingxian, they could not interfere in the matters of the Great Thousand World because the ancestors would not allow it. Hearing Lin Yun's words, Shao Chen did not say anything. Shao Chen had no other choice but to return to the Great Thousand World. Shao Chen. Not knowing who he was about to face, Shao Chen felt a little helpless.